One between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Aoi Hiroto lived an ordinary life but was intensely focused. At 20, he was on the verge of a typical life but with a promising future ahead. He was studying game design technology at university and working as an intern at a small game development company, where he spent his days immersed in code, testing his ideas, and trying to shape virtual worlds and stories he himself had always enjoyed playing. Although it was just an internship, he had big ambitions, and technology had always fascinated him. But for now, this was his reality. He quickly put on the company shirt and black pants, grabbed his backpack, and left home. On the way to the train station, Aoi passed the same street, saw the same shops, the same hurried faces heading to work. He didn't feel particularly different from any of them. He was just another person in the crowd, trying to find some meaning amidst the daily chaos. When he arrived at the station, he saw Yuka, a coworker who usually took the same train. They exchanged a quick nod and a tired smile as they got on the train. "Aoi, you've been too dedicated to that game. Have you thought about taking a vacation?" she said, noticing the dark circles under his eyes. "I think my vacation will be when I finally finish this damn project," he replied with a sigh. Looking a bit concerned, she warned, "You're going to end up collapsing from exhaustion. I know it's your first independent project, but you need to take it easy." "Ha ha ha, but it'll be worth it soon." Aoi and Yuka continued talking as the train moved on. She joked about his serious demeanor, nudging his arm and saying he needed to relax a bit, and that games should be more about fun than obligation. He smiled slightly but looked away, a little embarrassed. As much as he admired Yuka, he knew he had no room for anything besides work and training in his schedule. However, when he saw her laughing, he caught himself thinking that maybe going out with her might not be a bad idea, a thought he quickly brushed aside, refocusing on what he needed to do at the office. When they arrived at the office, the routine continued without surprises. Aoi greeted his boss, took the file with the day's tasks, and sat down at his desk. The office was simple, with white walls and a constant smell of coffee. His boss, a middle-aged man with a serious demeanor, handed him yet another challenge for the day. "Aoi, I need you to adjust the combat AI. Let's make the enemies adapt better to the player's style." "Got it, I'll start working on it right away." The day went by with few interruptions, except when Yuka came over to discuss the development progress. She was more experienced and always brought new ideas, but Aoi was too focused on his project to pay attention to anything beyond his monitor. When the workday finally ended, Aoi felt a momentary relief. He turned off the computer and packed his things. Yuka was still chatting with some colleagues about new projects and inviting everyone for a drink after work, but Aoi had somewhere else to be tonight. He put on his headphones, picked up his backpack, and waved goodbye. When he got home, no one was there yet. His mother was still at work. She had been working alone for some time to allow him to focus on his studies, which had made their situation quite difficult since his father's death. Despite this, she always worked hard to give him the best opportunities, and with some help from his aunt, he managed to get into university. You could say he would never have come this far without those two. They were the most important people in his life. He quickly prepared something simple for dinner: rice, fish, and vegetables. While he ate, he put on the latest episode of the anime he was following. "Maybe I'll accept the next invite they give me to go out with the people from work." After all, he was relatively stable at the moment. It might be time to look for a girlfriend. Yuka was single, if he remembered correctly, and she was really nice. He'd had a girlfriend a few years ago, but she ended up going abroad to study, and they decided not to maintain a long-distance relationship, even though they still liked each other. After dinner, he changed clothes and went out to his grappling training, looking for something to clear his mind from the routine. The training was intense, as always. On the mat, he could forget about work, codes, and responsibilities. There, the only thing that mattered was technique, movement, and physical contact. He had started training at a young age, since it was close to his home, and he only wanted to practice a martial art because it seemed cool to watch in anime, manga, and novels. It eventually became a serious hobby, practically inseparable from his life. "You look fired up today, Hiroto," Kazuki said as he got up from a breathtaking fall. "Is that the best excuse you can come up with for falling so fast?" he thought. I smiled and said, "It's more accurate to say that you're the one getting worse." He scratched his head, embarrassed. Hey, I just found out my girlfriend is pregnant. Maybe I'm a bit distracted. I was surprised. Now, that's a surprise. Congratulations, by the way, weren't you two going to wait until you got married? He laughed. Not everything went as planned, so we want you to be the godfather. Are you in? He offered as we headed to the locker room. Someone's got to set a good example for the kid, after all. I said, laughing as I dodged the punch that followed. As we changed, we continued the conversation, talking about how we would make sure the kid would be a pro fighter if he showed an interest in the sport. In the parking lot, I headed toward my bike and got ready to leave when I heard Kazuki again. Still with that nervous smile, he said, "Thanks, man. Seriously, it means a lot." I nodded with a sincere smile, and we both went our separate ways, each heading home. The night was cold, and the damp air cut Aoi's face as he pedaled quickly home after training. The traffic was at a standstill, but the city still vibrated with nightlife. His legs were tired, his body still feeling the strain from training, but he felt relieved. Today's training had been intense, and for at least a few hours, he hadn't thought about codes or the project consuming him. He was filled with a moment of serenity. Suddenly, the peace he felt was shattered. Aoi looked ahead and saw, further down the street, a truck speeding towards a group of teenagers apparently arguing on the sidewalk. The driver slumped over the wheel, seemingly asleep. In their argument, none of the three noticed the danger coming their way. With quick thinking, he pedaled towards the accident, intending to throw his body over the kids by throwing himself from his bike while shouting, "Watch out, get out of the way." His heart pounded in his chest. He saw the three teens now realizing their situation, as well as a homeless man trying to push them out of the way, and he threw himself with all the strength he could muster. But to his despair, his leg, tired from training and the sudden effort, stiffened as a cramp hit him at the worst possible moment, and he didn't manage to throw himself with enough force to get them out of the way. In fact, the only thing he managed to do was increase the number of victims. He managed to reach one of them, grabbing them by the shoulders and trying to pull them out of the way, but the force of the collision was brutal. He didn't see if he managed to save anyone, and the truck, with a violence that made Aoi's body twist on impact, finally hit them all. During the impact, as his body gave into the pain and everything around him blurred, a feeling of injustice pierced him like a blade. He still had so much to do, so many dreams to accomplish, so many debts to repay. He thought of the unfinished project, the diploma he still didn't have, and his mother and aunt who were waiting for him at home. Not now, not yet, he thought, fighting against the darkness enveloping him. The world was crumbling around him, and all he wanted was one last chance to truly live. The metallic sound of deforming metal and the crushing pain consumed his perception. He saw everything in slow motion. The ground approached with terrifying speed. His vision darkened. Then, everything went silent. Aoi slowly opened his eyes, feeling a lightness he had never experienced before. The pain, which seemed to have consumed his body, had vanished. He was lying on the asphalt, with his senses so numb that his body no longer felt like his own. The sensation of being somewhere else was unmistakable. A constant buzzing trembled in his mind, and reality seemed strange and distorted, as if he were dreaming. It was then that he felt an immense warmth, seeing a lot of blood spreading around him. His body seemed to be on fire, while at the same time, a cold sensation took over his consciousness. The vision of people crowding around him and the sound of honking deeply resonated in his mind as he sank into darkness. He tried to get up, but his legs felt heavy, as if time itself was against him. He tried to call for his mother, but no sound came out. The light around him began to distort further until everything turned into a thick fog, and he found himself at a crossroads. Something was off. Something had changed. Aoi then regained consciousness, but no longer as the 20-year-old chasing his dreams. Now he was facing something much deeper. He saw his own reflection in a shattered mirror, fragmented. It was as if he was watching his life unravel, the moments he had let slip by, the choices he hadn't made. Time seemed to have sped up. Back in the intense light, Aoi felt his mind finally quieting down. He didn't know if he was dead, just dreaming, or merely delirious. But what he knew with absolute clarity now, more than ever, was that he couldn't go on like this. I still had so much to do, he whispered to himself as the light around him began to dissolve. Before he could fully understand what this realization meant, everything faded to black. Hey, So this is the first chapter, I hope you like it. MCs will reincarnate 3 years before Rudeus and will have a Laplace factor similar to Sieghart Saladin Greyrit, with a lot of physical strength and some magical enhancement. DaoistJunkYard creators' thoughts. 37 comments 0 vote. O2 awakening in a strange land. I woke up with a strange feeling, as if my body wasn't the same, as if I wasn't the same person. Something was wrong. No, that wasn't quite it. It was more like everything around me was different, more expansive and more wild. For a second, I wondered, what is happening? Where am I? 4xxxxxxxxxx. I tried to open my eyes, but everything was blurry. My eyes, they felt heavy, though not uncomfortably so. Blue spots moved everywhere, making it hard to focus. It was as if I could see the world in a different way, more sharply. With my vision still blurred, I tried to focus on anything around me. I noticed something different about myself. My hands, they weren't the same. They were smaller, with shorter fingers, small claws emerging from them, and dark skin. Looking around, or at least at what I could see, I began to move my tiny hands around and then noticed something else. My ears, were they large? And furry? They had a strange shape, like a cat's or a dog's. Is this me? Are these my ears? Like an animal's? My memories, everything felt distant. It wasn't like I had forgotten who I was, but more like a weight had settled on my chest, something that made me feel disconnected. What I knew for sure was that this was not Kyoto. As I continued to feel around, I discovered a soft skin, what felt like fur, fluffy and smooth. It seemed like a person, but very large, or maybe I was just very small. I heard something close to me again, as if someone was trying to get my attention. XXXXX, XX. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Another voice, a bit further away, spoke this time. I started trying to discern the sounds around me, only to realize they weren't Japanese. From what I could tell, they weren't English or Spanish either. Nothing anyone was saying made sense to me. Everything felt strange, the way people moved, the nature surrounding me, the sounds. None of it was familiar. And then, the faces started to become clear. A large, serious face bent over me with a stern expression, but when it saw me, healthy and unharmed, his look softened slightly. He was smiling. A small but genuine smile that soon faded. He looked strong, with dark skin, dog-like ears, and silver hair. He seemed impassive, yet I noticed a tail wagging animatedly. What is this, are we all cosplaying here? I tried to ask him where I was, NNH, or at least, that was my idea, but only random whimpers came out of my mouth. There was another woman in the room, almost scantily dressed, with rabbit-like ears and blonde hair. She examined me from various angles before nodding and leaving the tent. My memories were blurry, distant. It wasn't that I had forgotten who I was, but everything seemed veiled, as if a weight was pushing down on me, distancing me from who I once was. One detail, however, was clear: I had died. This was not my previous life. That thought was a mix of relief and confusion. Could it be, after dying, I reincarnated? XXXXXXX, XXXXXXXXXXX. The man said something before leaving the tent. I thought this was fiction. Was this really happening? I was so lost that I didn't even notice when something, or someone, picked me up. A warm, safe feeling, and the gentle scent of skin and leaves comforted me. This someone had a serene, loving presence, and though I didn't know her, a primal instinct whispered in my mind. My mother. I couldn't understand a word that people around me were saying. Everything sounded strange, even the words spoken by the gentle face looking at me. The woman had an expression of tenderness, and even without understanding her language, I could feel her intentions. She seemed joyful, caring. She had short white hair and red eyes, with dog-like ears that I guessed were just like mine. I didn't know what she was saying, but the calm tone and genuine smile were something my heart understood. Still stunned by all these new experiences, a wave of tiredness suddenly washed over me, and I passed out. In the early days, this new reality was harsh and bewildering. I could feel my muscles growing stronger than I expected. My hands, still small, were already stronger than those of other children, and though my movements were clumsy, they were agile. As the days went by, Celine, as my mother seemed to be called, took me to explore what I somehow understood to be our home. She carried me through branches, enormous trees, climbing through the heights of the forest. My mother carried me with a gentle smile, as if she wanted to show me every bit of this new world. As we climbed each step of trunks and vines, a thought echoed in my mind. This certainly doesn't seem safe to do with a baby. And at the same time, I was fascinated by the natural way she moved. She showed no fear, was perfectly in control, leaping from branch to branch, and I, with no other option, could only watch with a mix of trepidation and admiration. The forest was indescribable, massive trees whose thick leaves filtered the sunlight into fine, bright rays, casting a soft green glow in the air. The constant humidity and the fresh, damp smell of leaves filled the air. Looking at it all, I thought, is this my new home? How can something like this even exist? By now, I was almost certain that I wasn't on Earth anymore. I doubted trees could grow this huge there. None of these people seemed to be at some cosplay event, and this superhuman physicality couldn't be faked. To test, I confirmed through a few experiments that at least my ears and tail, and my mother's too, were very real. It seemed I had reincarnated into a beast race tribe, living high up in this vast forest. Well, first of all, I was doing my best to learn the language quickly, but I could only recognize names for now. When we finally arrived at the suspended cabin that was our home, I noticed how it was both carefully and simply built. Made of wood and leaves, it looked fragile but safe, with openings that let in the fresh wind. Still, I couldn't shake off a certain uneasiness. Will I fall if I get too distracted? As time went on, I started to understand the complexity of my new body. At only 3 weeks old, I was already able to crawl. This was fast, even by my race's standards, judging by the surprise my parents showed. There was a strange strength I still didn't know how to control. My movements were clumsy, and my strength, disproportionate. One day, I was headed toward a water pot, moving too quickly and ended up twisting my arm. The pain was intense, surprising me, and I let out a whimper, which worried my mother, as I was usually a quiet baby. Actually, it's quite absurd. I just broke a bone, and all I did was whimper. Do babies normally break bones so easily? Or is something wrong with me? My mother left the house and returned in about 3 minutes. Alongside her, another figure appeared. A tall woman with pointed ears, bright eyes, and golden hair, wrapped in a soft cloak, leaned over me. After saying some words I didn't recognize, a warm light ran through my arm, and as I felt the pain vanish, a thought crept into my mind: could she be some kind of healer? Who was this woman, and was that magic? Though I already suspected, knowing there was actual magic here was truly exciting. Having played so many games, I'd always imagined what it would be like to be inside a game myself. I looked at the woman I assumed was an elf, with shining eyes. Celine and other members of the tribe seemed to respect this mysterious woman. I looked at my mother and saw her grateful, yet worried expression. Well, they have the ability to heal, maybe I can trust this world more than I thought. But now, who was this woman? I wanted to ask, but didn't know how. None of their words made sense to me yet. I just observed her, trying to understand what was happening. She spoke with Celine and other tribe members, but I understood nothing. All I knew was that she had healed me, and the pain that had consumed me had disappeared. My mother looked at me with a concerned face, but also with a look full of love. She didn't seem angry. No, she seemed grateful that I was okay, yet a bit worried about what had happened. Even with the pain fading, I still couldn't fully control my body. Something in me was different. I was stronger, faster, more wild. My instinct for survival and the urge to explore were intense. I didn't want to be weak. I didn't want to depend on anyone. I wanted to be strong. Over time, my mother took me to a tent to interact with other children. I felt a constant need to prove myself, to test my strength. It was an instinct that made me want to appear the strongest among those my age. This, however, wasn't going well. Other children seemed more fragile, smaller, and often ended up crying or getting scared. What's wrong with me? Why am I intimidating a bunch of kids? But they are really weak. Wait, that's not the point. An instinct to stand out and show what I was capable of burned within me, but I tried to control it. I would need to be stronger in this world, and for that, I would need to adapt and learn everything I could, even if it was at the pace of this small, beastly body. Celine, my mother, watched over me with immense patience, even when I caused small incidents. There was a tenderness in the way she handled me, gently pulling me away from anything dangerous or calming me with a soft touch. Her touch, even without words, conveyed a sense of peace I couldn't fully understand. One day, my father, at least, that's how I called him in my heart, came to check on me. He was a strong presence, always with a serious expression, yet there was a respectful look in his eyes. Somehow, I felt that he was proud of me, even without saying a word. When he placed his hand on my head, I felt something new, perhaps a sense of pride. It was as if he saw potential in me that I didn't yet understand. I truly missed my former life. I spent so much time with my new mother because she reminded me of my mother from before. I wondered if my friends missed me. Kazuki was probably annoyed that I'd left just when he was about to become a father. I hoped Yuka had taken over my project. It was almost finished, and I couldn't bear the thought of anyone else taking credit for something I'd worked so hard on. I didn't know what the future held for me, but I knew that this body and this world were now my reality. I didn't know my own name until I heard it repeated to me several times, Rygar. Something inside me said that this name was part of who I was now. I reborn in a new world with a strength I didn't yet know how to control, and a fate that seemed to be calling me. I didn't fully understand everything around me yet, but one thing was certain, I was Rygar Adoldia, a new being in a new world, striving to adapt and find my path forward. O3 Rygar Adoldia. There I was, hair blowing in the wind, head held high and chest puffed out, gazing at the vast green expanse from the top of a tree, an epic scene, at least in my mind. Because I noticed my mother laughing behind me, genuinely finding my attempt at looking heroic, despite my size, to be cute. It had been a little over a year since I reincarnated into this world, and every day brought a new challenge and discovery. From my first movements to finally being able to stand and walk, I felt that I was making progress. Today, I can run, and even though I'm not as fast as an adult, considering my size, it's already something quite impressive. I may be small, but every step, every run through the forest, is a reminder that I can grow and improve. My strength was also not typical for someone my age. If I had to estimate, I'd say I had the strength of a 6 or 7-year-old from my previous world, something remarkable for my small, still developing body. My family and the rest of the tribe noticed this quickly, especially when I was able to move things that no one would expect someone my age to be able to lift. I thought it would be wiser to hide this strength, but every time someone was surprised by it, I felt a strange but pleasant sensation. And since this strength had only been beneficial so far, I decided not to hide it. I could feel my muscles adapting, as if this body were quickly adjusting to some internal need to grow stronger. Another detail was my vision. My golden eyes, different from the red ones most of the tribe had, seemed to go beyond just a change in color. I could see more clearly and from greater distances. When I focused, I sometimes saw something around people, almost like an aura. Since this was a world of magic, I thought it might be one of those aura powers from anime, or maybe just mana, since I could see this aura more clearly around the warriors of the tribe. On one occasion, I was watching my father and another warrior from the tribe train. He was strong, not just strong, his movements were truly superhuman. I focused hard because I could see the aura flowing through their bodies as they fought, but after 10 minutes of intense concentration, everything began to spin, and I passed out. I woke up hours later, and from what I could understand from my mother's conversation with Verdia, the elven healer who had treated my arm, I had suffered a mild mana exhaustion. Since then, my mother has been even more cautious with me, even limiting my time outside, which was unusual because she had always encouraged me to go out. I admit, I was a little disappointed. Being stuck inside when there was so much to explore. It wasn't easy for me to accept. But my disappointment didn't last long when torrential rains started falling across the region. Apparently, this was normal. The Great Forest experiences seasonal rains that flood the forest floor. At least I discovered why we live in the treetops. The best thing, however, happened recently. I'm finally starting to understand the language. It took a while, but after hearing so many conversations and with Celine eagerly teaching me, I was starting to get the hang of the words. My speech still needed improvement, but little by little, I could communicate. And with that came new opportunities. One morning, while my mother was talking to Verdia in the simple house we lived in, my mother stepped into another room, and I quietly approached. Verdia was sitting next to a small fire, drinking tea she had made herself. She looked so calm and serene, which fascinated me. "Have you been recovering well, Rygar?" Verdia said when she saw me approach, her voice soft but firm. "Do you feel any discomfort in your arm?" "No. It doesn't hurt," I replied after a moment to process my words. Verdia nodded with a pleased smile. "If you feel mana exhaustion again, tell your mom to call me. I have a theory about what it could be." I was mesmerized. That smile was so bright, like the sun. I had never seen anything so beautiful and pure. Damn baby body, she'll never take me seriously with this appearance. I didn't want the conversation to end there, so without thinking, I approached and asked. "How did you do that with my arm?" My voice was filled with curiosity. Verdia looked at me, smiling with a kindness that seemed genuine but also distant, as if she knew my journey had only just begun. "Magic," she started, tracing a strange circle with her finger on the table. "It's not something that can be easily taught, little Rygar. It requires patience, control, and, most importantly, understanding. It's an energy that flows through the world, but there's much you need to learn to truly feel it." I stood there for a moment, absorbing her words. Maybe one day, I would understand this energy. But for now, I simply admired her ability, wondering how useful it might be. At that moment, my father, Huntar Adoldia, appeared in the doorway, interrupting our conversation. He motioned for me, and when I turned, his expression was serious but with a curious gleam in his eyes. "Come on, Rygar, I have something I want you to take part in," he said, as he walked out of the house again. "How rude." I quickly said goodbye and trotted after my father. When we reached a clearing, I saw about 10 children, around 3 or 4 years old, by my estimate, along with some adults and older children talking and laughing as they watched the younger ones. An old man, whom I remembered was called Tiro, was organizing the children into a line. The mood was lively, and I could see some of the kids mocking me. One of the older children looked at me with a sneering smile. "Hey, are you the monster kid?" he said, crossing his arms. I looked at him for a moment before ignoring him and glancing at my father, uncertain. This seemed to irritate him, but I kept ignoring him. My father then explained that this was a small race with the younger children of the tribe, a sort of tradition, and he brought me early because he thought I'd be able to handle it. He left me with the other kids and went off to talk to the others. Ignoring the kids trying to get my attention, I looked at the course, which led deeper into the forest. As I prepared, motivation and anticipation began to surge through my body. By this point, I had already realized that the instincts of this new body were very strong, heavily influencing my decisions, whether it was my instant attachment to my new mother or my respect for my father's presence of strength. I definitely hadn't thought like this before I died. These instincts also came with a drive to be strong, to be better than my peers. Sure, I practiced martial arts in my past life, but it was just a hobby. I never wanted to be the best at it. With this body, though, although I wasn't sure, if I weren't a rational person, I might have been following these instincts and become closer to a beast than a human. But this feeling wasn't just about my family. I felt an unexpected connection with the other children, with the trees, and even with the earth beneath my feet. Every day, the tribe's environment seemed less strange, less like a place I had been thrown into, and more like a home. I felt like I belonged there, and when I heard the laughter of the other children and the shouts of adults calling for their kids, something deep within me responded to it. Even though my rational mind tried to ignore it, my senses, my body, and even my heart felt increasingly in sync with everything around me. This sense of belonging was unsettling. I had never been so connected to the idea of family and tribe in my previous life. I only had 2 family members I cared about, my mother and my aunt, and a few close friends. Here, my heart and mind were in constant conflict. While my rational side tried to maintain distance, my instincts embraced this new life with an almost ravenous intensity. And this internal struggle grew every time I looked around. The Rygar who had been reborn here was more than just a reflection of the Aoi Hiroto I had been before. He was a complex blend of my bestial instincts, my human rationality, and the environment I now called home. It was as though, with each step, I was being shaped by forces far beyond my understanding, something as wild as it was ancient. And perhaps, at some point, I had begun to find an answer to who I really was now. But for now, winning this race won't hurt, so let's go. Hey, are you listening? One of the kids called out to me. With the signal from Tiro, the children started to run, and I followed them, leaving the talkative child behind. Ah, he started running behind. The race began, and like a flock of arrows shot into the air, the children darted into the forest. I was among them, my clothes ready, my mind focused, but my body still small and in development. Since it was in the forest, it wouldn't just be a test of strength, it would be a mix of speed, dexterity, and cunning. The first part of the course was simple, but the dense trees and the roots extending across the ground created a web that only an agile body could navigate. The first real obstacle was a series of thorny bushes. The children ahead of me began to stumble, their steps slowing as they tried to dodge or carefully pass through. I, however, already knew what to do. Using the momentum of my short legs, I jumped, my muscles responding with more strength than I expected. It was as though my body had been trained for these challenges. I passed through easily, not getting caught in the thorns, and gained several meters. As I ran, I felt my instincts sharpen. I knew I had the strength, but it wouldn't be enough, my legs were much shorter, and I was at a disadvantage. I needed to be smarter. The next obstacle appeared quickly, a stream, with a series of rocks forming a path. I relied on my increasingly sharp vision, clearly distinguishing which stones were usable, and jumped nimbly across the path. As I moved forward, the terrain became more difficult. The dense vegetation and the wet, soggy ground started to make the path slippery, but this didn't slow me down. I knew I couldn't stop if I wanted to keep the lead I had gained. The last major obstacle appeared right in front of me, a massive rock blocking the way. It was probably meant to be avoided, but I was already making good progress, and I wasn't sure I could reach the end in time by taking the traditional route. I decided to trust my strength, gathered my determination, and leapt forward, feeling the wind against my skin and the adrenaline coursing through my veins. As one of my feet barely grazed the top of the rock, the tree signaling the end of the race came into view. A large tree that we all had to reach and strike with our claws. It was an old tradition of the tribe, a test of strength and skill, and the first child to reach the tree and make a claw strike on the trunk would be considered the winner. Looking to the side, the others were catching up, but I was closer. The sound of heavy breathing and hurried footsteps couldn't distract me now. I would probably strike first. My instincts flared. I could feel a strange energy, albeit faint, in my body, a life force pushing me forward. I looked at the tree, its thick branches and its trunk already carved with marks from generations of small claws. With a surge of energy, I made the final sprint, feeling light, as if the very ground was pushing me forward. When I reached the base of the tree, I jumped and, with all the strength I had built up, struck the trunk with my claws in a victorious roar, which probably sounded more adorable than fierce. The impact echoed through the forest, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The others stopped, staring in surprise, and I knew I had won. I, Rygar, the little one who had been underestimated, had overcome the obstacles and come in first. As the others began to arrive, one by one, they all looked at me with a mixture of surprise and respect. Tais, the boy who had called me monstrous earlier, arrived second, but he didn't look upset. On the contrary, he seemed impressed. Huntar, my father, was watching from a distance with a serious expression, but when he saw my victory, his eyes lit up with a pride I had never seen before. And, although this race didn't mean much, I felt a strange sense of accomplishment and pride. I, Rygar, had won. And in that moment, I thought to myself that my journey had only just begun. Oh, for the way forward. Pav Huntar Adoldia. My name is Huntar Adoldia, a warrior from the Doldia tribe. You could say I'm relatively strong. If I had to estimate, I'd say I'm at the level humans would consider advanced among warriors, which makes me one of the strongest in the tribe. I've never left the Great Forest, except for one time when I joined an expedition to rescue our enslaved people. It was also when I met and saved my wife, Celine Adoldia. Perhaps because she had been influenced by human society and had lived much of her life as a slave, she was different but not in a bad way. When I saw the lifeless look in her eyes turn to radiant hope after I rescued her, I had already fallen in love. Celine didn't stop me when I confessed my love. It was more as though she had been eagerly waiting for it. She never spoke much about her time as a slave, saying it was a dark period, in contrast to her current cheerful and affectionate self. It was as if every second after that was making up for the lost years. But I wasn't complaining. It was that kindness and brightness that made me fall in love with her in the end. Our life reached its peak after the mating season. Celine was pregnant, and I was so excited, but I made sure to keep my exterior calm and serious. Celine, in contrast to what I expected, was calm and relaxed, not seeming worried at all, just genuinely happy. Her pregnancy wasn't without complications. The baby moved a lot, and with each movement came a wave of pain for Celine. It got serious enough for me to seek help from an elf healer, Verdia, who owed me a favor. With her overseeing the pregnancy and casting healing spells when necessary, the baby was finally born. The birth itself wasn't difficult, just the tribe's midwife was there, and that was enough. When I saw him healthy, I was overjoyed. Watching Rygar grow up was like watching a storm form on the horizon, unpredictable, powerful, and significant. From a young age, he showed something special. His eyes, his reactions, his curiosity, and especially the intensity I felt whenever I paid attention to him. Once again, I wasn't complaining. My life couldn't have been more perfect. I had an heir, and his talent was astonishing. I was worried at first because he reminded me of Ghislaine, the beast girl from the Dodoldia tribe. Her feral instincts were so strong that she was more beast than man, and she really couldn't live in society. But, fortunately, my son didn't have that problem. He was the complete opposite, very intelligent, learning and absorbing everything around him quickly. His immense strength and intelligence started making me think, maybe he would be the one to take the beast race to a new level. As a result, I began pushing him harder, giving him challenge after challenge, which he solved with masterful ease. I could never show much pride, but when I felt his gaze on me, I felt as if he could see right through me. My son was sometimes frightening. Another thing that surprised me, Verdia, contrary to what she had intended, became attached to my son. She had initially planned to leave after confirming he was healthy, but due to his persistent attachment, she decided to stay a few more years until he grew up. Elves are strange when it comes to time, what feels like nothing to them could be years to us. She told me that my son might have talent for magic. I'm starting to wonder if there's anything he isn't good at. Except for those times when he's overtaken by his instincts, of course, where apparently all his cunning and intelligence vanish. I smiled as I remembered him running on all fours after a rabbit, as if it were his prey. His love for meat was evident. May the great fire's protection be in the place you seek. I call the bold heat of a torch here and now. Fireball. I did it. A child's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. Verdia had called me to follow her and Rygar to a small clearing to witness something. Now I could see a small fireball floating in front of my excited son. Verdia, with her serene gaze and a smile on her face, turned to me and said, "I didn't expect less. He learns quickly." I shook my head, unable to take my eyes off him, stunned and shocked. My son can cast magic at the age of 3. Indeed, you can already consider yourself a beginner fire mage, little Rygar, Verdia replied, lifting the boy into the air by his arms. My son looked as though he had been punched by an invisible force upon hearing the last part, but soon recovered and smiled. Let's try the others now. And so, on that day, my son became a beginner mage of fire, water, earth, and wind, struggling a bit with the last one, trying 3 times before succeeding. MC's POV. These last 2 years have been filled with new discoveries, first and foremost, magic. After seeing my growing interest and insisting so much, Verdia agreed to teach me, as long as I had my parents' approval. My father agreed easily, but my mother was more demanding. She declared that she would only allow me to learn magic once I could read and write, arguing that mages needed to be intellectually prepared. While this might have seemed like an obstacle, I took it as just another challenge. I had always been interested in languages, and the morning lessons with my mother quickly had me mastering the written language of the tribe. When I asked to learn the human language too, she was surprised but pleased with my insatiable curiosity. Another thing I was able to confirm was my theory about mana strengthening. After watching many of my father's fights, it became clear that many fighters enhanced their blows with mana. I tried to replicate the result during this time, but I didn't have much success until now. When I asked my father about it, he told me that this energy was called battle aura, something you acquired naturally through training. I didn't really need it at the moment, as my natural strength was growing faster every day, to the point where my strength already rivaled the adults in the tribe. but I didn't know how far it would take me, so I continued my battle aura training for now. The most significant discovery, however, came when I realized something extraordinary about my mana. One day, after focusing my gaze to the point of exhaustion and almost passing out from a lack of mana, I noticed that, when I recovered, I could keep my magic eye active for longer than before. This discovery led me to conduct several experiments, where I confirmed that whenever I completely drained my mana reserves in a day, they regenerated bigger the next day. When I shared this with Verdia, she was surprised, as she believed, like most mages, that the amount of mana was fixed since birth. I realized that this peculiarity could be a unique advantage, as long as I continued to use it strategically. These 2 years were full of discoveries and advancements, but I knew I still had much to learn. With each small victory, my curiosity grew, and I sought to learn more about this new world. In the following months, before I turned 3 and started my physical training with my father, I spent my days discovering new things. My mother, Celine, was tirelessly kind and loving, and her affection reflected in everything she did. When Verdia began teaching me magic, my mother was always close by, often watching with a look of pride or encouraging me with kind words. Verdia, in turn, was a well of patience. I felt comfortable asking questions, even when I knew they might seem obvious or annoying. One day, while learning fire magic, I asked, "Why does magic exist?" Verdia smiled. "I've always thought it exists to remind us that limits are meant to be challenged and that even the impossible can be shaped by the right hands. Controlling it is understanding its nature, but also respecting it. That's what separates a talented mage from a reckless fool." Those words stayed with me, and I applied them to other aspects of my life. It was a good philosophy to follow when it came to magic. The sound of the wind passing through the treetops filled the clearing where we were training. My father was focused, his voice firm as he adjusted my stance during a combat drill. As soon as he noticed my talent for magic, he began my hand-to-hand combat training, fearing that I might not find it as interesting. From what I understood, warrior training usually began at age 5, but he thought it wouldn't be a problem if it were me. "Keep your center of gravity low, Rygar. That way, you can resist the impact." The first drill was a strength contest. My father was much bigger and stronger than me, but I had something he didn't expect, knowledge of grappling from my past life. When he lunged to grab me, I quickly lowered myself, using his movement to seize his leg and pull it, unbalancing him for a moment. He laughed, surprised. "Interesting. Where did you learn this?" "I just thought quickly," I lied, trying to cover it up. Even so, he noticed something different. My approach was more strategic than instinctive, and that intrigued him. Gradually, I began incorporating more complex techniques, like holds and locks, which, although not perfect for my child's body, gave me an unexpected advantage. "You're small, but you fight like an experienced predator. That's rare for someone your age," he said as he knocked me down so quickly that I couldn't react. You're getting better." Again, we trained until dusk, and by the end, he gave me a proud look. "You have much to learn, Rygar. Remember, you may be strong, but you're small and inexperienced, don't blindly rely on your strength," he said wisely. Of course I know that, but did he have to beat me so much? I'm only 3 years old. This is child abuse, I'm calling the police. "Of course, father, I definitely won't forget that," I said with a sinister smile, which only looked strange on my child's face. At night, after dinner, came the moment I looked forward to most. Sitting beside Verdia and my mother while they told stories of places beyond the great forest. Verdia started, as usual, drawing maps on the cabin floor with a stick. "Rygar, did you know that beyond this forest, there are lands so different they could seem like another world?" she asked as she made winding lines. "What are they like?" I asked, my curiosity growing. She smiled. "Milis, for example, is a kingdom of religious humans. Their cities are surrounded by tall walls, and many people there follow the laws of Saint Milis. They believe in order and purity, or at least, that's what they say." My mother, Celine, leaned in, adding, "But not everyone in the world follows those beliefs. The kingdom of Asura, on the central continent, is very different. They are the wealthiest and rule as a great monarchy. It's a place of intrigue and luxury, but also of inequality." Verdia continued, her tone more serious. "Little Rygar, there's something you always need to be aware of in this world. There are those who see people like us, the beast race, as tools or objects. They're the slave traders. My mother sighed, the usual brightness in her eyes dimmed for a moment. I was a slave myself, Rygar. I've seen up close how they treat those they capture. That's why it's so important that you grow up knowing the value of freedom. These words resonated with me. While my body sought physical strength through training, my mind sought to understand what it meant to be just and strong. After 3 years living with these people, I noticed that despite their animalistic traits, they weren't so different from humans. The idea of others thinking they had the right to enslave them just because of their race seemed repugnant. But that wasn't something I could change in this world, at least not for now. During my explorations of the forest, I began to notice that the other children looked at me differently. Some started following me wherever I went. Maybe it was my unusual ability to think logically and strategically, or my strength, which surpassed theirs despite being the same age. When we played fight or explored the more dangerous areas of the forest, I instinctively took on the role of leader. Let's go this way, I said, pointing to a less obvious route. The rabbits tend to hide on this side, and the vegetation is denser, so we might find tracks. How do you know that? Asked a boy named Karun, eyeing me suspiciously. I observe, I replied, shrugging. The forest speaks if you know how to listen. They laughed but followed my instructions, and we ended up finding what we were looking for. Thus, my position as leader began to solidify, even though I never asked for it. It was during a family dinner that my father mentioned something that stirred the entire tribe. Guys is excited, Huntar started, with a light smile on his face. His wife is pregnant. Celine beamed. That's wonderful. The next generation of the Didoldia clan is on the way. Huntar nodded, but his expression grew thoughtful. Rouge is also expecting a child. 2 heirs to chiefs being born almost at the same time. This will strengthen the bonds between the clans. I fell silent, absorbing the information. I knew that these children would play an important role in the tribe's future, but I also wondered what kind of relationship we would have. My father said that the holy beast had also been born, but this will be kept secret from everyone until it is old enough. Legends say that this beast will join the hero who will save the world or something like that. I don't know how much I believe in this, but I guess I'll have to wait to see this holy beast first. During the quieter nights, I found myself thinking about what I wanted for myself in this world. I felt the desire to explore, to live adventures beyond the forest. But I also knew I had a responsibility to my family and my tribe. Strength without purpose is nothing, I remembered my mother's words. My decisions would be shaped by these stories, by these teachings. While my body longed for battles, my heart and mind sought a greater purpose. Something that would give meaning to the life I was given. 5 invisible chains, unpredictable winds. It's been a few months since I turned 4 years old. Here, they don't celebrate birthdays annually like they do on Earth. Verdia said it's because of the high death rate before the age of 5, which is a bit morbid to think about. In the tribe, it seems they only celebrate some kind of coming-of-age ceremony, but my mother wants to have a small celebration for my 5th, 10th, and 15th birthdays. Apparently, she saw a lot of this in human society and thought there was no reason not to celebrate. That morning, I decided it would be a day of achievement. I had just returned from a successful hunt and, for the first time, I wanted to prepare my meal without help. The idea seemed simple: roast the meat over the fire I summoned with magic. However, the result was disastrous. The meat was burnt on the outside and raw on the inside, and the smell was so strong that even the birds flew away. I chewed a small piece, trying to ignore the bitter taste, but gave up shortly after. Maybe cooking isn't my calling, I muttered as I tried to erase the evidence of my failure before anyone saw. I sighed and added the experience to my list of lessons learned. At least in magic and combat, the progress was undeniable. Deciding to head home, I started running and jumping through the trees, leaping between roots and branches with the agility of a true Doldia. My father had already told me that if it was purely about physical strength, I had surpassed many of the warriors in the tribe, which made me curious about how much stronger I would become once I learned to use battle aura, a technique I had been making some progress with in my training recently. Wherever I passed, tribe members waved or gave curious glances. My name was already known by almost everyone, not only because of my magical and physical training, but also because of my constant habit of running through the forest. I had already become publicly known as the little genius of the Adoldia clan. Praised for my strength and my ability to perform magic at such a young age. These comments made me proud, but I didn't let them go to my head. There was still so much to learn, and with the guidance of my father, Verdia, and Garu, each day was a new opportunity. I performed magic with a natural ease that even impressed Verdia, my patient and demanding teacher. She said she had seen many things, but never a child so young capable of understanding so many spells at such an age. Not that my life was limited to spells and magic words. In addition to my training with my father, I began learning the art of sword fighting from Garu, one of the best warriors in the tribe. There were two main fighting styles among the Doldia, one that used swords and various weapons, which I liked to call the Doldia style, and the other that used only the body, with natural weapons like claws, fangs, and fists being the focus. My father didn't usually use a sword, but he explained that the Doldia techniques were a natural variation of the Northern God style. Many techniques of the Northern God style were actually attempts to copy the Doldia style. The fundamentals of the Doldia style focused more on enhanced senses, instincts, reflexes, and quick movements, making full use of the environment. Use the environment to your advantage, Rygar, Garu would always say. A fight is never just about strength or technique. It's perception, reflex, and adaptation. Rygar, a sword isn't just steel in your hand, it's an extension of your senses, my father once said while watching my training. I still felt more comfortable using my claws and body to fight, it just felt more natural to me. I simply had to follow my instincts blindly, and something good would come from it. That's how I spent most of my time. Running through the forest with other children, training with Garu and my father, and casting spells creatively became my routine, a routine that made my name known throughout the village. Current status: Fire magic, Advanced. Earth magic, Advanced. Water magic, Intermediate. Wind magic, Intermediate. Healing magic, Intermediate. Detoxification magic, Beginner. Howling magic, Basic. Northern God style, Beginner. Combat with natural weapons, claws, instincts, etc. Intermediate. Intellectual skills: reading and writing in beast god language and human language. Mathematics, university level. Practical skills: excellent hunter. Horrible cook. My mana reserves were steadily growing. I didn't know if I was capable of casting a saint tier spell yet, but I had to use several advanced tier spells to exhaust my mana. Even keeping my magic eye active all day wasn't enough anymore, though I didn't do that because it would be strange to constantly see magical power everywhere. Still, I always made sure to deplete my reserves, ensuring constant growth. After finishing another detoxification magic lesson, I sat next to Verdia under the shade of a tree. She was resting, but her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she watched me. I took the opportunity to ask something that had been bothering me. "Teacher, can I ask you something?" She gave me an amused look. "As long as it doesn't involve spells to make soup." I blushed. I often asked her about all kinds of random magic. But it really didn't make sense. There's magic to create a devastating tornado, but none for making soup. This world has evolved in constant war, so why only think about destructive magic? It's about how I use magic. When I learned howling magic, I realized it doesn't use incantations. Why do the other spells need them? Her expression grew serious. "You noticed that on your own?" she asked, looking surprised. "Yeah, it just feels natural. But why can't I do the same with fire or water magic, for example?" I rarely questioned her teaching methods because she seemed to know what she was doing, but I decided to ask just in case. Verdia thought for a moment before answering. "Incantations help shape and direct mana. Think of them as instructions for your power. However, instinctive magic, like howling magic, is different. It comes from the spirit and the body, without needing words." "So, does that mean I can use other magic without incantations?" She smiled slightly. "It's possible, but there are only records of very experienced people managing it. I've only met 3 such people in my entire life, they're rare. However, there's only one way to find out. Let's go to the clearing." The place was surrounded by tall trees and bathed in the soft sunlight. Verdia gestured for me to position myself. "Let's start with something simple. Focus on a water spell, but without incantations. I don't have much to teach you about this since I don't have this ability, but try to replicate the feeling and say the incantation in your mind, it might help. I closed my eyes, feeling the mana flow like a current inside me. Normally, I say the words, but this time I kept silent. I visualized a sphere of water forming in my hand while thinking about the incantation. To my surprise, it appeared almost immediately. I did it, I exclaimed, looking at Verdia. Impressive. That's a rare skill, little Rygar. I was planning to have you try this when you were older, but it seems I underestimated your talent. She looked genuinely surprised this time, it was hard to get that expression from her. I nodded, taking a deep breath. I imagined a flame floating before me, dancing in the air. Once again, without saying a word, the mana responded. A small flicker of fire sparked, vibrant and warm. Verdia laughed, clearly impressed. Rygar, this is a truly special skill. You have a natural talent, so remember, how much you develop this ability depends on your effort. Keep in mind what I've taught you about magic, and just follow your own path. She hesitated for a moment, then said, Little Rygar, do you want to be my disciple? It would still be the same, but we would be bound by something greater than just teaching. I noticed a hint of melancholy, but I was excited. Of course, Master, I would love to, she smiled. That's when a chill ran down my spine. What was that? I murmured, instinctively activating my senses. Verdia noticed it too. Something's wrong. Stay alert. We decided to investigate the surroundings and found strange footprints marking the ground. Boot prints, as if they had been made in haste. This isn't good, Verdia said, her tone serious. Is this what my father is investigating? I asked. Over the past few days, a subtle tension had begun to build among the warriors, and my father seemed to be in the middle of an investigation. Yes, she nodded, but her eyes were filled with concern. Although I was excited, there was something in her voice that hinted at worry. Now that I thought about it, she'd been like this all day. I wondered if this was what had been bothering her. When we returned home, we found my father, Huntar, with his arms crossed, his expression stern. He looked at me for a moment before speaking. Rygar, Verdia, something is happening in the forest. Guys came to find me. He says there's strange movement to the north. Soon, Guys Dodoldia appeared, his imposing figure filling the doorway. Huntar, we need to investigate. These movements aren't natural, and I fear they might signal bigger problems. Understood, my father replied, turning to me. Rygar, stay home, don't go out for anything. But father, I tried to protest, but he interrupted me. This is non-negotiable, stay and protect your mother if necessary. He said, looking at my mother. As I was still processing his words, Verdia stepped closer, her face bearing the same seriousness. I've also received news. The elves have called me back to the village. It seems that if anything happens here, they might be affected as well. My father sighed deeply. Then go, my father said, nodding. They will need you as much as we need our defenses here. With those words, the atmosphere grew heavy with concern. My father and Guys left for the north, and my mother and Verdia began to pack their bags for the journey. As they spoke, an uneasy feeling grew inside me. Something was wrong, and I knew my peace was running out of time. Night had fallen, and the village was silent. The wind passing through the trees brought with it an uncomfortable chill, but it wasn't the cold that made me uneasy. It was the moment of farewell. Verdia was standing outside our house, going over her belongings as my mother, Celine, watched in silence. I approached slowly, trying to find the right words to say. Are you sure you need to go? I asked, trying to hide the worry in my voice. Verdia looked up, a gentle smile appearing on her face. Yes, little Rygar, the elves need me now, just as you and your mother need Huntar and Guys to protect the forest. I can't ignore their call. My mother, who had been quiet until then, stepped forward and held Verdia's arm. Take care out there, Verdia. We know how dangerous the situation can get, but don't forget, the tribe will always be here for you. Thank you, Celine, Verdia replied, gently touching her hand. I'll return as soon as I can. Verdia turned to me, and her eyes seemed to shine, as if she was trying to capture every detail of the moment. Rygar, listen to your mother. And, more importantly, keep practicing. You have everything you need to become someone incredible. I hesitated for a moment, but then spoke up. I'll train. I'll protect everyone here while you're gone. Just come back as soon as you can. I really liked her, I truly did. She had taught me so much since I arrived in this world, and there was this gentleness and elegance about her, an aura that was truly hypnotic. She smiled, but there was something melancholic in her expression. Don't worry, I'll come back, and when I do, I want to hear all about your progress. Suddenly, she knelt down, holding my face with both hands. Remember, Rygar, even when you're alone, you're never truly alone. Your strength lies in the people you love, and they are always with you, in some way. My words caught in my throat, and all I could do was nod. My mother placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently as if to offer comfort. Verdia, you are already part of our family. Go in peace, but know we'll always be here if you need us, my mother said firmly. Verdia stood up, adjusting the quiver on her back, and gave one last look at both of us. You're my family too, I'll come back. Without another word, she turned and disappeared into the trees, her silhouette swallowed by the darkness of the forest. We stood there, my mother and I, in silence, staring at where Verdia had gone. Finally, my mother broke the silence. She's strong, Rygar, but we are strong too. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. I nodded, but something inside me still weighed heavily. The night felt darker than ever. If danger is waiting, how can I stand still? I thought, feeling the unease take over me. As I walked back home after another training session, I spotted a group of children playing near one of the smaller clearings. They were laughing and running, lost in their games. One of the kids, a boy named Killian, saw me and ran toward me. Rygar, did you see how I climbed that tree? Yeah, Killian, you're getting really good at that, I replied with a smile. As he looked at me, proud of himself, an idea came to mind. With dangers looming, maybe it was time to prepare the younger ones for whatever might come. I approached Killian, placing a hand on his shoulder. Killian, I need you to gather our group. Call everyone, I want to talk to you all. He blinked, confused, but didn't question me. Okay, Rygar, I'll gather everyone. Shortly after, around 30 children, ranging from 3 to 7 years old, were gathered around me. I looked at them, feeling the weight of responsibility. Listen up, all of you, I began, my voice firm. There are dangers in the forest. My father and the other adults are investigating, but in the meantime, we need to be ready. You're all weak, and I want to teach you how to defend yourselves. There were murmurs among the group, some curious, others frightened. This means we're going to train, I continued. You'll learn to run faster, climb better, and use your senses like true members of the tribe. And who knows, I might even teach you a little magic. The murmurs stopped, replaced by excited looks. Killian was the first to raise his hand. When do we start? I smiled. Tomorrow morning. Get ready, because I'm going to make you sweat. The children laughed, some clapping, and the group's energy shifted to excitement. In the back of my mind, I knew it was more than just a game. Preparing them was my way of keeping an eye on things, even if it was just to buy time until the adults resolved the issue. At that moment, another child arrived, panting. Rygar, there's a group of adventurers coming. They're approaching from the west trail. The warriors of the tribe are there now. My mind went into overdrive. I didn't know what this meant, but I knew it wasn't something to be ignored. Without hesitation, I turned and began to run toward the village entrance. My heart raced as I wondered what these strangers wanted from us. Rygar's life is starting to get more complicated. As I mentioned, he doesn't have as much talent as Rudeus, who mastered everything Roxy knew in just 1 year, but his talent is there. His work as a game designer helps with his understanding. His first battles will take place in the next chapter. Let me know what you think. DaoistJunkYard creators' thoughts. 27 comments 0 vote. 06 Roads of Blood and Fire. Upon arriving, he found the tribe's warriors alongside a group of strangers. In the clearing, Lonar Didoldia, the warrior responsible for the tribe's security, was exchanging blows with an unknown man. Instinctively, Rygar activated his magic eye. The world around him shifted. The stranger was tall and athletic, with black hair tied into a ponytail and a focused posture. He wielded a long, elegant sword that seemed to dance through the air. His movements were precise, combining direct strikes with a fluid style that Rygar couldn't entirely recognize. There was something deeply unsettling about him, a strange instinctual feeling Rygar couldn't quite explain. The fighters exchanged intense but clearly friendly blows. The sound of steel clashing reverberated through the air, and the crowd watched in fascination. Yet, Rygar felt something stirring deep within him, an aggression that began to take over his senses. When Lonar stepped back after deflecting a particularly quick strike, Rygar couldn't hold back any longer. Letting out a roar, he charged at the swordsman with explosive force, aiming directly for his throat. Rygar's attack was swift, but the stranger didn't flinch. Instead, another figure intercepted him. Before he could land his strike, Rygar was firmly grabbed and thrown to the ground in a motion as smooth as a flowing river. He tried to resist, but the strength holding him down was unshakable. "Calm down, boy," said a deep, commanding voice. "No one here is your enemy." Looking up, Rygar saw an older man with short graying brown hair and an imposing presence. He held his sheathed sword at his side, clearly ready to act if needed, though his expression remained calm and controlled. "Rygar." Lonar rushed over, placing a firm hand on the young boy's shoulder. "Stop this. They are not enemies, it's just a friendly sparring match." Rygar was breathing heavily, shame burning his face as he slowly stood, avoiding the eyes of those around him. "I'm sorry, it was instinctive." "Ha, you tried to kill me over an instinct," scoffed the swordsman. Lonar, still stern, crossed his arms. "If he did, it's because he saw something in you that we don't. Our instincts rarely fail." The swordsman raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Instead, he turned his attention to the other members of his group, gathered a bit farther back. As tensions eased, Fendrel formally introduced himself and his group to the villagers. "I am Fendrel Ashbrand, the leader of this group, the Red Dragon's Breath. A pleasure to finally meet you all," he began, smiling warmly as he addressed the wary villagers. "We are rank S adventurers, and our journey began with a rescue mission. However, what brought us here goes beyond that." Pausing, he observed their reactions before continuing. "I am a sword saint, and my mission started when a beast folk slave saved my life during a battle. I was gravely wounded, and despite her terrible condition, she cared for me. Before her death, she asked me to free her son and bring him back to the Great Forest. Upon arriving here, we learned of the challenges your tribe is facing. We couldn't simply walk away. That's why I've decided to help, and my group chose to follow me here." Fendrel's gaze softened as he looked at Rygar, as if wanting the boy to understand his intentions. "The debt is mine, and I see it as my responsibility to repay it." He gestured toward his companions. Darian, the swordsman, gave a simple bow. "I'm Darian, swordsman, not as skilled as Fendrel, but my blade is sharp." Irina, the elven archer, spoke with an indifferent tone. "I'm Irina, archer." She eyed Rygar, noting the distrust still present in his gaze. Goran, the dwarf, raised his voice jovially, trying to lighten the atmosphere. "Name's Goran, the drunkard of the forge. Not a saint, but good with an axe and a barrel of ale." Marla, the healer, followed with a calming presence. "I'm Marla, healer. If anyone needs care, I'm here." Lastly, a halfling introduced himself with a mischievous grin. "Zen, thief." A young beast folk child hiding behind him piped up shyly, "I'm Gunnar." The village's reception was far from warm. Despite Gunar's account, which confirmed Fendrel's story and eased some tension, the villagers remained skeptical. Having lived in isolation and with internal struggles, they watched the adventurers' every move with suspicion. Outsiders weren't easily trusted, especially during such uncertain times. "Who are these people? What do they want here?" one elder murmured, glaring at the group. "Our tribe has its own warriors, we don't need strangers." Even with Fendrel's explanation, doubt lingered. It was hard for the villagers to believe that a group of adventurers would come all this way out of pure altruism. Rygar felt the unease in the air. He too harbored reservations, particularly about the swordsman Darian, whose earlier sparring match had set him on edge. Yet, Fendrel's calm demeanor and sincerity made Rygar hesitate in outright dismissing him. Over the days that followed, Rygar observed the adventurers closely. Darian was almost too composed, revealing little about himself. Irina maintained a detached curiosity about the villagers, never venturing too close. The others, more willing to engage, were met with cool politeness but little warmth. Still, Rygar couldn't shake the feeling that Fendrel carried a unique burden, one that resonated with him. Perhaps there was more to this group than met the eye. As the days passed, Rygar began to hope the tribe's warriors would return soon. Their presence would make him feel more secure amidst the growing tension. One day, during one of his training sessions, Fendrel watched as Rygar moved with the natural weapons inherited from his Doldia lineage. His sharp claws and the instinctive agility of his body allowed him to adapt to improvised combat styles. Fendrel crossed his arms, studying the young warrior as he blocked and dodged Garu's attacks. "You have what I'd call natural talent," Fendrel remarked. Rygar paused, looking at him curiously. "Talent for what?" "For the sword god style. It's the way you move, direct, efficient, focused on ending a fight with a single lethal blow." Though Fendrel seemed impressed, he didn't dwell on the comment. To him, talent only mattered if paired with hard work. "Don't let it go to your head. Talent is just a seed. Whether it grows depends entirely on you." Rygar didn't respond. While he enjoyed using a sword, he found it far easier to improve by fighting with his claws and fists. As the weeks went by, Rygar became more involved in the village's daily routines, including helping younger children learn the basics of combat and patrolling the area. Initially, it was just a distraction, something to fill his time when he wasn't training with Garu or pushing his own limits. But soon, he realized he enjoyed teaching. "Focus on your balance," Rygar told a small group. "If your feet aren't steady, any strike will throw you off." The children looked up to him with admiration, eagerly mimicking his stances and movements. Despite his youth, Rygar already stood out as someone with the strength and skill of a seasoned warrior. As the months passed and he turned 5, Celine held a small celebration for just the two of them. She gifted him a ring engraved with a wolf design. The adventurers were gradually integrating into the village's routine. Rygar, though still wary of Darien, began training regularly with Fendrel. Despite his growing respect for the group leader, Rygar couldn't ignore something peculiar. Whenever he activated his magic eye during their training sessions, he noticed Fendrel's battle aura was unlike anything he had ever seen. "It's sharp," Rygar reflected during a break. "Every movement is like a blade, but controlled. It's as if he doesn't waste a single drop of energy." One day, after an especially intense sparring session, Fendrel commented, "You've got monstrous strength for someone your age." He rubbed his shoulder where a strike from Rygar's claws had torn part of his light armor. "If you learn to control it, you could become something truly dangerous, in a good way." Rygar felt a mix of pride and frustration. Despite his strength, he knew Fendrel still outclassed him in technique and experience. "My strength means nothing if I can't use it properly," he thought. During training, Rygar began to blend his natural grappling knowledge, something he had learned in his past life, with the instinctive combat techniques of his new body. In one bout, he managed to take down the veteran swordsman by grabbing his arm during an attack, twisting his body, and pinning him to the ground. Of course, he knew that if Fendrel had been serious, his head would have been severed before he realized it. "Interesting," Fendrel said as he stood up with a grin. "You don't limit yourself to one style. That flexibility will take you far." "It's not like I choose to do this," Rygar replied, panting. "It feels like my body just reacts." "Then start training your reactions, too," Fendrel retorted. "Reacting without thought is useful, but reacting with intent is what separates a common fighter from a master." Apparently, there were two kinds of warriors, instinctual and rational. Fendrel categorized Rygar as a pure instinctual fighter and noted that, while this approach made initial progress easier, it wouldn't take him as far in the long run. Beyond combat, Rygar began practicing chantless magic, something he still didn't fully understand. During a solitary training session, he focused on channeling mana into a simple fire lance spell. By concentrating all his energy into a single burst, the spell became intense and powerful but left him exhausted. "I need more control," Rygar muttered to himself as he watched the smoke slowly dissipate. "The more mana I pour in, the stronger the spell gets. This could be useful for short battles, but I need to find a way to use it strategically." Over time, he realized he could quickly deplete his mana reserves by overloading spells. This prompted him to think of new ways to combine his combat abilities with magic, something that could become a decisive advantage. In one of the rare moments of rest, Rygar sat beside his mother, Celine, as she wove a fishing net. He hesitated before speaking. "Mom, have you ever felt like you weren't yourself?" Like something inside you was pushing you to do things you didn't understand. Celine paused, looking at him with a warm, understanding smile. Sometimes, she replied, I think it's part of who we are, Rygar. That wildness, some are born with more of it, others with less. We're connected to nature, and nature isn't always rational. But you have something special. You have a choice. Rygar was silent for a moment. Mom, can you teach me how to cook? She burst out laughing. Her words lingered in Rygar's mind, echoing as he continued his training and patrols around the village. As time passed, Fendrel gradually earned the trust of the tribe's leaders. The adventurer leader maintained a friendly and respectful demeanor, never forcing interactions. He respected Rygar's space and often engaged in small conversations about combat and strategy with the warriors, asking about the tribe's fighting styles without ever questioning Gustav de Doldia's authority. Rygar was surprised by Fendrel's approach. His mother and Verdia had told him that sword god-style practitioners were usually arrogant and unrestrained. Yet, Fendrel didn't act superior, he was more of a battle companion. He corrected Rygar's movements gently, never in a rush to teach but always with wise words. As the days went by, Rygar trained with Fendrel more often. He didn't know exactly what to expect, but the experience was overwhelmingly positive. Fendrel's technique was refined, and Rygar learned a great deal just by observing him. Rygar realized that Fendrel wasn't just a skilled swordsman but also an incredible strategist. Sometimes, when Fendrel demonstrated more advanced techniques, Rygar felt as though he was missing something, as if failing at something that should have been simple. But instead of becoming frustrated, he dedicated himself even more to his training. With every sparring match, he felt something changing inside him, though he couldn't yet identify what it was. You're already at an advanced level, Rygar, at least in your style, Fendrel once commented after an intense training session. But you need to learn to control not just your strength but also your emotions. Battle isn't just about brute force. Like I said, you've gotten this far relying purely on instinct, but it'll be hard to progress much further that way. I know, Rygar replied, breathing heavily. It's hard not to follow my instincts when they feel like the best move in a fight. It's been years since I left the Sword Sanctuary, but I heard there's a new Sword King called the Black Wolf. She's also from the beast race. I don't know if she had the same problem, but if you ever want to advance further, you could seek her out, or go directly to the Sword Sanctuary. You might even have a chance to become the Sword God's disciple. Each day, Rygar became more aware of how far he was from mastering his strength. But training with Fendrel was the right path. He could pinpoint Rygar's mistakes and tell him exactly what needed to be done to improve further. Rygar was steadily becoming a stronger leader, increasingly aware of his abilities. His training sessions with the village children continued, but now he incorporated techniques he had learned from Fendrel, blending grappling maneuvers into his combat style. His ability to immobilize opponents before delivering a decisive blow was unconventional but remarkably effective. He noticed that his beastly nature was becoming harder to control, yet it seemed to manifest precisely when he needed it most. Over time, Rygar also grew closer to Arena, the elven archer from Fendrel's group. Initially cold and distant, she eventually warmed up when she realized that he was simply curious about her mentor, Verdia. Now he knew her full name, Verdia Solarian. The forest was quiet that night. Rygar's footsteps were muffled by the dense undergrowth, his senses sharpened by months of training and patrols. He moved cautiously, yet his mind remained on high alert. Slave traffickers and smugglers still posed a constant threat in the area, and his mission was clear: patrol and protect the village. As he neared the forest's edge, where the terrain opened up, distant voices caught his attention, sharpening his hearing. His magical eye activated instinctively, and his vision focused on the source of the sound. 4 figures moved briskly through a clearing, their pace urgent. Rygar crouched low, hidden among the foliage, and observed. What he saw made his jaw tighten with restrained anger. 2 smugglers were carrying beast children, bound and teary-eyed. A wounded beast woman was slung over one man's shoulder, her body limp. The other man held her upright by a rope tied around her neck. The children, though visibly terrified, resisted as much as they could, their defiance a testament to their spirit despite their dire situation. Slavers, Rygar thought, his blood boiling. They won't leave here alive. With his heart pounding, he activated his magic eye and locked onto his targets. His perception sharpened, and the metallic tang of blood and the acrid stench of sweat mixed with fear filled his senses. 2 of the men carried swords and appeared reasonably skilled, though still no match for him. Nonetheless, caution was essential. The man leading the group barked, "Hurry up. The crossing will be tough if we don't move faster." The other man glanced around nervously but kept walking. "Damn beast folk. One more ambush, and we're done for. Let's get this over with." Rygar crept closer, a shadow in the darkness. With a deep, guttural growl, he unleashed his howling magic. A powerful, deafening wave of sound rippled through the clearing. The smugglers staggered, clutching their ears as they reeled from the sonic assault. The beast children and woman winced, but the slavers were left completely vulnerable. Rygar pounced like a predator from the shadows, moving with surprising speed for someone his size. His first target, a man wielding dual swords, tried to react but was too slow. Rygar's clawed hand wrapped around his throat, his sharp nails digging into flesh. A savage smile crossed Rygar's face as his beastly instincts took over. With a brutal squeeze, his claws tore through the man's neck, ripping flesh and severing arteries. The slaver crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Nearby, the second swordsman, still dazed, struggled to regain his footing. Rygar turned to him with predatory precision, conjuring a flaming spear in his hand. Without hesitation, he hurled the spear, and it struck the man square in the chest. The explosion of flames consumed him in an instant, his screams echoing into the night. The remaining 2 slavers panicked. One attempted to flee, but Rygar was faster. He sprinted after the man, tackling him with monstrous strength. Pinning him against a tree, Rygar's claws tore into his throat, silencing him forever. The final slaver, desperate, drew a knife and turned toward the beast woman. She was too weak to resist as he raised the blade, but before it could descend, Rygar was there. In a blur, he struck the man with an open-handed claw swipe, the force enough to send him sprawling. The knife clattered to the ground, and Rygar delivered a final, fatal blow. The clearing grew silent except for the labored breathing of the rescued captives. Rygar turned to the children and the beast woman, his earlier rage subsiding. His predatory expression softened as he crouched near them. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low but steady, as he began to heal their wounds with magic. Cutting their bonds carefully, he freed them. The children, still trembling, stared at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. The beast woman, though gravely injured, managed a faint smile of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Rygar nodded solemnly. He picked up the 2 children, cradling them gently in his arms as the woman limped alongside him, following his lead back toward safety. His thoughts churned. This was his first kill, yet it felt natural, instinctual, a necessary act to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. But a small, primal part of him relished the hunt. Months passed with several small skirmishes around the village. Each time, the tribe's warriors swiftly handled the threats. Finally, the expeditionary warriors returned to the village. Their arrival brought both relief and unease. Exhaustion was etched into their faces, and it was clear that their journey had been grueling. Rygar stood beside Fendrel as the returning warriors entered. The initial tension between the tribe and the adventurers had eased over time, thanks in no small part to Fendrel's calm demeanor and their actions in protecting the village. Gustav, the village chief, exchanged a knowing look with Fendrel before addressing Rygar. "Come with us. You've earned your place in this meeting," Gustav said. Rygar nodded, his resolve hardening. Whatever news the warriors had brought back, he was ready to face it. The weight of responsibility hung heavy in the air, but for Rygar, it was yet another step on his path to becoming stronger, for his tribe, and for himself. A slightly longer chapter this time, but I plan to keep it at around 2,000 per chapter. What did you think of the battle? And Fendrel. DaoistJunkYard creators' thoughts. 38 comments, 0 vote. 07 The Shadow of War. The familiar figures of Guise, Huntar, and a small group of warriors appeared on the horizon. In the village, murmurs of anticipation quickly gave way to worried expressions. Children ran to their mothers, while the elders exchanged tense glances. Guise, the seasoned tribal veteran, walked at the forefront, his demeanor serious and his eyes scanning the village. Beside him, Huntar bore the hardened expression of someone who had faced difficult days. Their leather armor was worn, marked with fresh battle scars that told their own story. Gustav, the tribe's leader, quickly approached, his eyes scrutinizing the group. Just you. His voice came out colder than he intended, but the question was unavoidable. Guys stopped and motioned for the other warriors to disperse and rest. Turning to Gustav, he responded gravely. The others stayed behind. There were many problems. Huntar, standing beside him, added. We found clear signs of movement from the underworld. Large groups, too large for us to face directly. Part of our group remained at the borders to monitor them, but we don't know if they'll return, Guys finished, his voice heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The news hit the village like a stone. Villagers began murmuring, and a tense atmosphere spread quickly. Some mothers clutched their children tightly, while others searched for answers in the warriors' eyes. Gustav stood silent for a moment, assessing the situation before commanding. Come to the central tent. We need to discuss this immediately. Fendril, Rygar, you're coming too. Who are they? Guys asked sharply, glaring at Fendril and his group, his body tense. After months of fighting slavers, it was difficult to mask his bloodlust and disdain. Gustav cut him off. They've been helping defend the tribe these past months. So wipe that look off your face and offer your thanks. Hearing this, the warriors calmed, and Guys offered an apology. Inside the central tent, the atmosphere was heavy. Besides Gustav, Guys, and Huntar, several of the tribe's most experienced warriors were present. Rygar had been allowed to participate due to his strength and recent contributions. It was the first time he had witnessed something so serious, but he knew this was an important moment to understand what was happening. Gustav looked directly at Guys. Explain in detail. What did you see? Guys crossed his arms, taking a deep breath before replying. We found organized groups at key points along the borders. These aren't just merchants or common hunters. They carry symbols of known underworld factions. They're armed and appear to be preparing for something big. We tried to send messages to other tribes, but we've received no response. Huntar added, the worst part is that they know about us. We encountered ambushes and signs that they've been monitoring our movements. And they don't seem to care that we're aware of it. Gustav furrowed his brow, processing the information. And the rest of the group? Why did they stay behind? They volunteered to continue surveillance and buy us time. They're also tasked with warning us if anything happens. We know the risks, but we had no other choice, Guys replied, his tone laced with regret. As the adults discussed, Rygar couldn't shake a feeling of urgency. He recalled the stories about slavers but had never imagined the threat could be so close. His mind raced as he decided to speak up. If we know where they are, why don't we strike first? Rygar asked, his voice cutting through the tension in the tent. All eyes turned to him. Some were surprised, others skeptical. Guys looked at the young warrior with a firm expression, though not disdainful. Attacking now would be suicide. They need so much preparation because we have the advantage in these forests. If we attack recklessly, we'll lose that edge. We don't know how many there are or how well equipped they might be. Huntar nodded in agreement. We need more information before acting. Any rash move could cost us dearly. Despite their words, Rygar felt that something was being withheld. The meeting dragged on as Gustav and the other leaders debated their next steps. The possibility of an attack on the village seemed increasingly real, and the distrust toward the recently arrived adventurers only added to the tension. When the meeting finally concluded, Guys placed a hand on Rygar's shoulder as they exited the tent. You're growing fast, boy. But remember, patience is as powerful a weapon as strength. Rygar nodded, though his clenched fists betrayed his lingering unease. As night fell, the young warrior couldn't help but look toward the horizon, where the other tribal warriors still remained. Perhaps they were fighting for their lives. He also thought constantly of his master, Verdia. Were the elves facing something similar? Worry gnawed at him. He knew that sooner or later, it would be his turn to confront the looming war. While the village remained on high alert, Rygar exhausted his mana reserves by practicing earth magic, making it as dense and rigid as possible. He was confident he could already use a saint-level spell, but lacking a proper benchmark made it hard to gauge his current capabilities. He was about to cast another spell when his heightened hearing detected movement several hundred meters away, far from the tribe. Approaching stealthily, he saw Zen, the halfling rogue. He almost called out but paused. What was Zen doing here? Without drawing attention, Rygar followed him through the forest, hiding in the shadows. When they reached a clearing, Rygar watched as Zen exchanged signals with hooded figures. He could clearly hear murmurs about the village and its weaknesses. Anger flared in his chest, and it took every ounce of self-control to keep him from leaping forward and tearing them apart. He knew that confronting Zen directly would be unwise. Instead, this information had to remain a secret. He waited for the right moment and then returned to the village, where he confided in Guys and the tribal leaders about what he had witnessed. Gustav immediately devised a plan to capture Zen and his allies by surprise, ensuring they remained unaware they'd been discovered. They decided to inform Fendrel as well, reasoning that if he had wanted to harm the tribe, he could have assassinated the leaders quietly and escaped. Fendrel was visibly shaken upon learning of Zen's betrayal. He assured Gustav that the treachery was isolated and reaffirmed the loyalty of Darian, whom he had known since childhood and trusted with his life, as well as Irina, his lover, who had as much to lose as the tribe's residents due to being an elf. Even so, it was decided that only Fendrel would be privy to Zen's betrayal. With the growing need for protection, Rygar decided to begin training the children he deemed most mana-attuned in magic. His physical and combat training had been progressing well, but he wasn't sure if everyone would excel in magic. To test his theory, he chose Killian, 5 years old, Lucina, 4 years old, and Tized, 7 years old, the 3 children with the greatest amount of mana and potential. If guided properly, they could become a significant asset to the tribe. Rygar started with simple instructions on beginner-level water magic, using this opportunity to test a theory he had recently developed about magic in general. If he was right, he was confident he could become a pioneering force in the magic of this new world. Huntar was hurled into the air, caught in the impact of a fiery explosion. Rygar emerged from the flames, his skin scorched, but his eyes fierce with determination. A roar echoed as he unleashed his howling magic in quick succession. Huntar was momentarily stunned midair before hitting the ground. When he regained his bearings, Rygar was already on top of him, his claws hovering mere centimeters from his jugular. The clearing was silent, broken only by their heavy breathing. "Too fast," Huntar muttered. "Do you yield?" Rygar asked, his teeth clenched. Huntar let out a short laugh, filled with pride and surprise. "All right, boy, I yield." Rygar stepped back, releasing his father, and exhaled deeply, a victorious smile spreading across his face. His mother, Celine, clapped enthusiastically, while Fendrel whistled in approval. "You're really growing," Garu, his sword instructor, remarked with a thoughtful gaze. "But remember, defeating your father once doesn't mean you've surpassed him." "He's right," Huntar added, standing with some difficulty. "But it was a good fight. I'd say, your best so far." Rygar nodded, trying to conceal the pride that burned within him. For a brief moment, he was not just a young apprentice, he was a true warrior. The shadow of night blanketed the forest canopy as Rygar and 3 other warriors moved silently under the faint glow of the moonlight. Rygar had his magic eye activated, scanning the surroundings for suspicious movement. Beside him, Garu led the formation with steady steps, while 2 other warriors held the rear. "These tracks are fresh," Garu said, crouching to inspect the ground. "Looks like they're trying to lure us somewhere. Or maybe they're just fleeing," Rygar replied, though the unease in his voice was evident. A distant snap froze the group. It wasn't the natural sound of breaking branches, it was deliberate. "Spread out," Garu commanded in a low voice. The battle erupted suddenly, like thunder shattering the silence of the night. The intruders advanced swiftly, but Rygar was prepared. Using his magic eye, he immediately detected the movement patterns and positions of the enemies. Each step, every motion, was clear to him, as though a web of energy illuminated the battlefield. With a primal roar, he charged forward, already conjuring earthen spears that erupted from the ground toward the invaders. The stone's impact echoed through the forest, forcing the enemies to dodge. Rygar seized the moment, casting advanced fire magic, Flame Slice, with a swift motion of his hands. The flaming blade sliced through the air, striking one man diagonally and leaving a searing cut across his chest. The explosion of fire hurled him backward, screaming as the ground around him cracked from the force. But there was no time to revel in the success. 4 more enemies charged with renewed ferocity. Rygar surged ahead, his sharp claws gleaming in the moonlight. He grabbed the wrist of an enemy, an armored man, and, with a fluid motion, disarmed him. In a single turn, he twisted the man's arm and slammed him into the ground with a resounding thud. The enemy was left vulnerable and stunned. Without hesitation, Rygar pounced, sinking his claws into the man's throat. The move was swift and brutal, leaving no room for defense. He felt the life drain from the body beneath him, but his instincts didn't let him stop. The thrill of the hunt clouded his senses, driving him to be fiercer, deadlier. As he stood, another enemy lunged with a sharp blade aimed at his neck. Rygar ducked, letting the blade pass over his head, and retaliated with a powerful kick to the attacker's knee. The man stumbled forward, and Rygar leapt onto him, tearing him apart with his claws like a predator overpowering its prey. Nearby, the other warriors fought with equal intensity. One sliced through an enemy's neck with a clean sword strike, while Garou disarmed opponents with precise cuts, targeting vital points. But the enemies weren't simple foes, 4 more remained standing, and the battle was far from over. Rygar, now in a near-trance state, fought with savage precision. His strikes became faster, more instinctive. His mind blurred as his body moved on autopilot, driven purely by the need to dominate the battlefield. As another enemy tried to attack from behind, Rygar spun around, grabbing the man's shoulders and slashing his neck with his claws. Then it happened. One of the tribe's warriors, approaching to celebrate the victory, placed a hand on Rygar's shoulder. Reflexively, Rygar spun and delivered a violent kick to the warrior's chest. The impact hurled the man backward, slamming him into a tree with a dull thud. Rygar, Garou's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Rygar stopped abruptly, mere steps from his ally. Realization struck him like a lightning bolt, and his eyes widened in horror. His blood still roared in his veins, but something deep inside broke as he saw the damage he had inflicted. Rushing to the fallen warrior, who was struggling to rise, Rygar immediately cast healing magic, his hands trembling as the energy flowed into the injured man. The wounds closed, but the guilt in Rygar's heart remained raw. I'm so sorry, Rygar whispered, his voice thick with remorse. The warrior, still dazed, looked up at him with a mix of confusion and understanding. It's fine, he croaked. You were in combat mode. That wasn't you. Rygar swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. He glanced around, seeing the other warriors watching him with a mix of respect and wariness. The battle had been won, but Rygar had glimpsed a far greater conflict brewing within himself. Bonus chapter. Today we enter the power rankings, there will be another chapter tonight. DaoistJunkYard creators' thoughts. 26 comments 0 vote. 08 Limits of Magic, Prelude to the Storm. The day was clear, but something in the air felt heavy. The Doldia village, always busy and welcoming, seemed different to Rygar. As he walked along the trails that cut through the huts, he felt the gazes. Many were still warm looks of recognition and admiration, but there were also cautious, even distrustful, glances. Since the incident during the patrol, when his instincts overtook him and he attacked one of his allies, the respect he had earned began to crumble. Although the attack hadn't caused serious harm, the act itself was enough to plant doubts in the tribe's mind. He wasn't blaming them, though. He had always managed to stay in control, but lately, he wasn't as sure. He was more afraid of losing his rationality than they were. While his thoughts tormented him, he spotted guys in the distance, standing near one of the watchtowers. The chief of the warriors stared at him with a serious expression. When their gazes met, guys gestured for him to come over. Rygar approached without saying anything. Guys led him to a more secluded spot, where no one would overhear them. The silence between the two was heavy, and Guys finally broke it, his voice firm. Rygar, can we talk? Guys asked, bluntly. The young man nodded, feeling the weight of the words even before hearing them. Guys looked at him with a mix of respect and concern. I heard from Garou about your incident. This is not something to be taken lightly. I know. Rygar's voice was a whisper. It felt like I couldn't think, like my body was moving on its own. Guys sighed, crossing his arms. That's what worries me. You know, you remind me of someone. Do you know that? Rygar looked up, surprised. Who? My sister, Ghislaine. The name made Rygar frown. He had heard stories about Ghislaine de Doldia, but rarely did anyone speak of her directly. What does she have to do with me? Ghislaine was like you, too strong, too wild. Since she was little, she was faster, more agile, and fiercer than any of us. Guys paused, looking at the horizon as if reliving old memories. She barely learned to speak the beast god language. She usually solved things with her fists. Always fighting, always challenging everyone around her. Then, when a wandering swordsman passed through here, she left with him. And you think I'm like her? Rygar asked, defensively. Not completely. You're different. You're intelligent, rational. You have the ability to learn and think beyond your instincts. But those same instincts are even stronger than hers, and your strength also far exceeds hers. Rygar felt a weight in his chest. Guy's words weren't said with anger but with genuine concern. What does that mean? Rygar asked, with a mix of challenge and hesitation in his voice. It means that, as much as I see your potential, I have to be honest. Guy clenched his fists, his eyes showing reluctance. Ghislaine could be controlled. She wasn't as strong as you. Your potential becomes something dangerous instead of something good. What I mean is, no matter how many contributions you make to the tribe, if one day I believe that you are a threat to us, I will have to ask you to leave. The words hit Rygar like a blow. I don't want that. I don't wish for that. Guy hesitated, his voice heavy with regret. But as the next leader, I need to protect our tribe above all else. Rygar didn't answer. He remained silent as Guy walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Rygar found an isolated spot near a stream, far from the village. He needed to think. Am I just a beast? He was reincarnated, and although he had realized his instincts early on, he always thought his rationality and adult maturity would prevail. But was that really the case? Is my place really here? These questions burned in his mind. He thought of his previous life, of who he was as a human. There, he had control. He had logic and reason. Here, however, it seemed like his instincts were always lurking, ready to take over. Am I a human reincarnated trying to live as a Doldia? Or am I a Doldia fighting against what I really am? These reflections led him to think of his mother. When Rygar got home, his mother immediately noticed something was wrong. She stopped what she was doing and walked over to him. Rygar, what happened? He hesitated but eventually told her everything. The looks from the tribe, the conversation with Guys, and his own fears. Mom, what if I really am a danger? What if I end up like a beast? His mother cupped his face with both hands, forcing him to look directly at her. Rygar, you are my son. No matter what happens, you will always be my son. But, what if I can't control it? Then we'll work on it together. She smiled, a warm smile that seemed to chase away all the shadows. You're not alone, Rygar. You'll never be. Those words brought him some comfort. He knew he wouldn't resolve this problem so easily, but as Celine said, he had people who would help him. For the first time, it sparked curiosity in him. Why did he come to this world? Was it for a purpose? Was it by chance? He didn't know, and honestly, he wasn't sure if he wanted to find out. Later, Rygar joined his subordinates. He started calling them that because they asked him to, and they were increasingly acting like an organized group. As Rygar instilled discipline and knowledge during their training, they realized that they weren't living in easy times, and they adapted to this reality. His group was already 50 members strong, with 5 main leaders commanding 9 others. As for his magic apprentices, Killian, Lucina, and Thais, the training was becoming more serious, and results were starting to show. Killian, the most promising, could already cast magic without chanting, something that impressed Rygar. Lucina was also close to reaching that level, while Thais was still struggling with the basics. Good job, Killian, Rygar said, trying not to show favoritism. But remember, it's not just about power. Control is equally important. Okay, now can you teach me fire magic? Sure, I said I'd teach you once you mastered the chantless magic, but remember, fire is different from water, earth, and wind. You could hurt yourself if you get it wrong. As he trained the children, an idea began to form in his mind. The ideas about mana and magic he had theorized seemed to be correct. Mana reserves, for example, seemed to grow in childhood, contrary to what magicians believed. And from Killian's example, and soon Lucina's as well, chantless magic followed the same pattern. Even if only the most talented might learn it, it would still be a drastic change to the magical and combat systems in this world. If this knowledge was wrong, what else could be? He decided that he needed to experiment more, think outside the box. Perhaps the limitations of magic were more psychological than real. And if that was truly the case, he was confident in his creativity to create all kinds of magic. While he was reflecting on this, two little girls appeared, both around 3 years old. The one with cat ears, with her arrogant posture and nose in the air, approached with confidence. "Are you Rygar?" she asked, arms crossed. "Yes. And who are you?" "I'm Linnea, and this here is Prasenna." She pointed to the other child, who had drooping dog ears and was absent-mindedly chewing a piece of meat. Rygar chuckled to himself. "Well, what do I owe the pleasure? I'm Linnea de Doldia, daughter of the future tribe chief, and I'm generously allowing you to teach us magic," Linnea said arrogantly, though her arms-crossed pose only made her look cute. Prasenna nodded her head, looking interested. "I decided to give them a lesson now so they wouldn't get caught off guard by life in the future." At dusk, a secret meeting was called by the tribe's elders, including Gustav, Guys, and some of the main warriors. To his surprise, Rygar was invited to attend. In the cabin where they gathered, there was a rudimentary map of the region sketched on a table, with stones marking critical areas. Gustav, the tribe leader, began. "We've received alarming information from the elves of the neighboring forests. Like us, they've been dealing with constant infiltration by trafficker groups. These attacks are not random. They're testing us, looking for weaknesses." Rygar felt a chill down his spine hearing this. His mind immediately went to Verdia, his mentor, who was protecting their homeland. "And what about ours?" he asked. "Until now, we've been able to maintain control," Gustav replied in a deep voice. "But we know it's just a matter of time before they try something bigger. That's why we'll anticipate the attack." He pointed to the map, where a set of stones marked the tribe's borders. "We'll make it look like we're gathering warriors to attack the trafficker bases just before the seasonal rains begin. However, that will only be a distraction." Guys completed the plan with a tense smile. "Actually, we'll keep our best warriors hidden in the village. When the enemies come, thinking we're vulnerable, we'll wipe them all out in one fell swoop." There was a moment of silence as everyone processed the plan. It was risky, but it made sense. Rygar narrowed his eyes. Zen, Fendrel, the leader of the adventurer group where Zen had infiltrated, nodded gravely. "We know he's passing on information, so we'll use that to our advantage. He'll send false reports about our movements to lure the enemies into the trap." It was an intelligent plan, but Rygar knew that its success depended on everyone's execution. After the meeting, Rygar threw himself even deeper into his training. He began to learn the sword styles more seriously, thinking that relying only on his instincts could become even more dangerous. Dividing his time between the sword god style with Fendrel and the northern god style with Garu, he began to perceive the limits and advantages of each technique. While training with Fendrel, Rygar noticed something intriguing. In moments of high tension or concentration, he would unconsciously activate his battle aura, as if it were a natural reflex. However, trying to use it consciously was a completely different experience. The sensation was like trying to hold an uncontrollable flow of energy, something he couldn't direct or maintain for long. Even with all Fendrel's explanations and demonstrations, the process seemed almost like a puzzle. He didn't understand how his mentor could summon and control the aura with such precision, as if it were an extension of his own will. "I'm still far off," Rygar thought, clenching his fists, determined to overcome this challenge. What would be possible if I combined the speed of the sword god with the unpredictability of the northern god? The idea of creating his own style wasn't new, but now it seemed more tangible. He realized that magic was heavily constrained by stigmas, and sword styles might be the same. After all, he knew that in his previous world, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of different martial arts. He knew he would have to learn everything he could before embarking on this path. Additionally, in his practice with magic, he experimented by combining earth and fire magic. The idea of creating lava had seemed absurd at first, but he managed some small successes. Magic is more flexible than we think. Maybe it's possible to completely rewrite what we know about it. These experiments filled him with determination. He was starting to see his strength not just as a weapon, but as a tool for change. With the young apprentices, Rygar became even firmer. He knew that to protect them, he had to instill discipline and responsibility in them. He had called Arena, the archer from the group, to teach the basics of archery to the children who were interested. Considering the difficult times ahead, she was happy to help. "No matter how talented you are, without discipline, talent is nothing," he would often repeat. Killian, who had already mastered silent magic, received special attention. This is just the beginning. Don't slack off in your sword training. Physical combat is just as, if not more important than magic. Losing control of magic can be more dangerous than failing to cast it. Lucina, who was close to reaching this level, was showing signs of frustration. Don't compare yourself to others. Everyone has their own pace, Rygar advised, though he knew his words sounded empty to a child. Ties, on the other hand, was the most challenging. Though he worked hard, he clearly struggled with the fundamentals. I can't do it, he exclaimed during a training session. Rygar approached him. Don't say that, I can see with my own eyes that your mana is getting more familiar with the process. At this point, he was almost sure that the younger the student, the easier it was to teach them magic. In addition to the three, Linnea and Persena, his new students, began to approach more. Linnea, though only 3 years old, exhibited a striking arrogance. I'm Linnea Didoldia, heir to the chief. I don't need lessons. Rygar laughed. Heir or not, everyone starts somewhere. And with that attitude, it looks like you didn't learn your lesson last time. He said, as balls of mud began to form in his hands while he walked toward her. Ah, Persena, with her piece of meat always in hand, was quieter but watched everything with interest. I train after I eat, she stated before taking another bite. The two were different challenges, but Rygar knew he needed to integrate them into the group. They would be important in the future, of that he was certain. As the days passed, the tension in the village increased. The warriors were restless, and the news from the elves kept everyone on high alert. Rygar, for his part, did his best to prepare. Between training, magic experiments, and reflections on who he was, he knew the confrontation was approaching. And when the time came, he would be ready. Current status. Fire magic, advanced. Earth magic, advanced. Water magic, intermediate. Wind magic, intermediate. Healing magic, intermediate. Detoxification magic, beginner. Howling magic, minor mastery. Merged spells. Lava ball, mud field, mud trap. Northern god style, intermediate. Sword god style, intermediate. Combat with natural weapons, claws, instincts, etc. advanced. Intellectual skills, reading and writing in beast god language and human language. Mathematics university level, practical skills, excellent hunter, good teacher, horrible cook. We're nearing the end of Volume 1. What do you think so far? Let us know in the comments. DaoistJunkYard creators' thoughts. 21 comments, 0 vote. 09 The destiny is forged by blood and steel. Pav Killian Didoldia. The rainy season was approaching. My nose itched, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth mixed with the fragrance of trees. Whenever that smell came, it meant the storm was near. It was familiar, but today, it felt different, heavier, almost suffocating. While practicing fire magic, a flame dancing in my hand, I glanced at Rygar. He was sitting near the edge of the clearing, as sharp as ever, carefully adjusting his sword. I'd seen him do this before, but today, it felt like he was elsewhere. His eyes gleamed with determination, but there was something more, concern, perhaps. Rygar was never like us. From the day I saw him leaping through the trees at just 2 years old, he already seemed different. Not just because he was astonishingly strong and talented. He was more, not in size, but in what he represented. He always knew what to do, always had a plan, even when everyone else was confused. When he stood, everyone stopped to watch. I remember the day he started training us. I had just turned 4, barely knowing anything about life. That towering figure became my teacher. I would have called him master, but he firmly forbade it. From that moment, I followed him wherever he went, except during his own training. When he wasn't around, we trained and played together, our group roaming the village under Rygar's banner. No other group of kids dared to challenge us, and we eventually absorbed any rivals into our own circle. Even with this new, larger group, Rygar always remained impartial and fair, resolving every problem and complaint with ease. My respect and admiration for him grew each day. Then came the day when Rygar was officially recognized as a warrior of the tribe, not just for his power but also for his intellect and maturity. I heard he had defeated his father, one of the strongest warriors in the village. That day, we celebrated as if the achievement was our own. Despite his new responsibilities, he never abandoned us, not that anyone expected him to. He could do it all, and he never made mistakes. I think it was on that day that I realized my goal. I was learning magic, and my parents and friends already found that impressive enough. But what Rygar was teaching me was a unique skill, one that I might never fully master. You can do it, Killian. Just guide your mana naturally, Rygar said, pointing at my chest and then my hand. Let it flow like a river. Don't try to control it all at once. And it worked. For the first time, I created a ball of water, small and fragile, without using any incantation. He smiled, and in that moment, I knew I wanted to follow him. I felt that this was my path, my destiny. As long as I followed him, everything would be fine. Since then, Rygar has become like a demigod in my eyes. Lucina, Ties, and I, along with the other division leaders, always looked to him for direction. And he always gave it. Even when things seemed grim, he found a way forward. Today, as I watch him, I realize he has changed. There's something heavier about him, more serious. The responsibility he carries is immense. Yet, even so, he doesn't falter. As I observed him, Lucina approached. Killian, what are you looking at? She asked, her voice curious, a faint smile on her face. Rygar, I replied, my voice quieter than I expected. Are you worried about him? I thought for a moment before answering. No, I want to help him in any way I can. Lucina fell silent, but I could tell she felt the same way. We weren't just his students. Rygar was our leader. That day, I made a silent vow. No matter what happened, I would stand by him. Because deep down, I knew he was more than just a boy. He was Rygar, and Rygar would make a difference. MC's Pav. The room was quiet, save for the sound of blades being sharpened and the occasional crackle of the firewood in the hearth. Fendrel stood against the log wall of the cabin, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on me. Irina sat beside him. Darian stood on the other side, spinning a knife between his fingers, his relaxed demeanor contrasting with the tension in the air. The two were inseparable, childhood friends. Whenever they spoke of each other, there was a camaraderie I envied. They seemed so synchronized, so human. Beyond them, the rest of the adventurers were scattered around the tent. Fendrel spoke first, breaking the silence. So, Rygar, you're saying Guise is leading a direct assault on the enemy bases before the rainy season hits? Yes, I replied firmly. We'll need your help again to defend the tribe, alongside the warriors stationed here, of course. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Zen's mouth twitch slightly as he heard me. Fendrel narrowed his eyes, studying me. He was quite the actor, even I almost believed his facade. It was a bold, risky plan, but it had a high chance of success if executed well. Darian chuckled, his tone light but tinged with admiration. You've got guts, no doubt about it. But, Fendrel, do you think they'll fall for it? These slavers aren't amateurs. It's a risk, I admitted, keeping my voice steady. But a calculated one. They might still hesitate to attack because of the presence of a sword saint. Fendrel walked to the table in the center of the room, placing his hands on it and leaning forward. He seemed to weigh every detail, glancing at his companions to gauge their thoughts. Finally, he sighed and nodded. All right, we'll do it. We'll do our best to protect the tribe in their absence. I nodded, swallowing the tension rising in my chest. I followed him silently, keeping myself hidden among the trees. Zen was careful, but not careful enough to lose me. He walked quickly, his eyes scanning the ground ahead as if afraid of being followed. And rightly so, I thought. My breathing was steady, my footsteps light. It was dark, but my eyes adjusted easily to the dim light, a gift of my race. Still, I knew that if Zen turned at the wrong moment, he might see me. He paused for a moment, tilting his head slightly. I crouched low, pressing my body to the ground, and held my breath. He glanced around, suspicious, but soon continued on his way. He left what appeared to be a letter inside a hollow log before moving on. When I was sure he was far enough away, I headed back to the village. When I arrived, I gathered Killian, Lucina, and Ties, along with Irad and Leon, the other two division commanders. They were waiting, their faces a mix of excitement and fear. Listen, I began, my voice firm. You cannot reveal yourselves, no matter what happens. Stay hidden until I give the signal. And if something goes wrong, we run to the forest, Killian finished, his eyes shining with determination. I nodded. Exactly. Protect the other children. And don't look back. No matter what you hear, don't stop. They nodded in unison, and I felt an immense weight settle on me. Before leaving, I went to my mother. She was organizing items in the cabin, likely trying to keep herself occupied. Mom, I called, and she turned to me, her face weary. Don't worry about me. Just stay safe. She hesitated, her eyes filling with concern. But finally, she nodded and pulled me into a hug. Her warmth gave me strength I hadn't realized I needed. Huntar, Guys, Garu, and several other warriors stood in a tense circle, their expressions grim. Gustav repeated the plan, detailing every movement with precision. Zen has delivered the false information. This should give us the advantage we need. When the battle begins, Rygar will launch a large-scale ice attack to destabilize them. I need all of you ready to strike as soon as their formation breaks. What about the enemy's strongest warriors? Any new information? Huntar asked, his concern evident. Gustav took a deep breath. They're the biggest threat. We know Fendril is here, but the Slavers don't seem to fear him. That means they have something, or someone, they believe can counter him. Guys clenched his fists. If they have a saint-level warrior, we can handle it, Gustav interrupted. Our losses might be greater, but no single man can stand against an army of warriors alone. I watched the discussion, conflicted. What if I lost control? It had happened before, and the fear of it haunted me. But I couldn't fail, not now. Days passed. The warriors had departed on an expedition to eliminate the Slavers. To make the ruse convincing, none of the families had been informed. The farewells were somber and heart-wrenching. I was now secretly standing guard at the edge of the tribe's territory, keeping my magic eye active and scanning for any movement in the distance. Suddenly, I spotted dozens of mana signatures approaching. I quickly sent a signal to alert everyone to prepare. Moments later, I sensed a presence. Fendril emerged from the main trail, followed by Darian and several other warriors from the tribe. They were armed and ready for battle, but something felt off about Darian. He seemed uneasy. The rest of our group will launch an ambush on their rear, Darian said, his voice laced with confidence and a faint smirk. Fendril nodded, his gaze sharp as it locked onto mine through the underbrush. I returned the gesture, signaling that we were ready. The moment the enemy entered the clearing, we would begin our attack. We're under attack. Gather all warriors now, Fendril shouted, his voice commanding. The guards sprang into action, preparing for the assault. Despite everything going according to plan, my instincts screamed that something was wrong. The invaders advanced through the forest, torches and swords in hand, setting fires wherever they passed. They were well organized, their threatening silhouettes cutting through the forming mist. Dozens of them marched, but my attention was drawn to the central group, 5 swordsmen who walked with absolute confidence. They were different, their posture, their aura, it all screamed lethality. Dressed in dark clothing accented with silver, each carried a longsword. They moved like shadows, their grace unnerving. Now wasn't the time to dwell on their strength. I gathered all the mana I could, feeling it surge and vibrate through my veins. The ground beneath me began to freeze, a thin layer of ice spreading outward as the air around me grew frigid. Taking a deep breath, I bent my knees and leapt into the air with all my might. Time seemed to slow as I soared upward. Below, the Slavers turned their heads, confused, watching the shadow streak across the sky. What is that? Someone shouted in alarm. At the apex of my jump, I raised my hand above my head, channeling all the mana I could muster into a single spell. A brilliant blue orb formed, pulsating with freezing energy and casting an eerie light across the shadowed forest. Freezing Nova, I roared, my voice reverberating with power. It wasn't the actual spell, I hadn't learned it yet, but it seemed close enough to what it would be. The orb detonated as it hit the ground, unleashing a blinding explosion of ice. A wave of frost radiated outward, shards of ice raining down like spears, impaling the ground and catching unprepared enemies. The temperature plummeted instantly, and a swirling blizzard enveloped the battlefield, leaving a pristine, cutting whiteness in its wake. When I landed, the impact cracked the frozen ground beneath me, sending out another shockwave of frost. Trees creaked and shattered, transformed into crystalline sculptures of ice. Many slavers screamed, trying to flee, but the cold claimed them before they could escape. A significant portion of the enemy was caught in the storm, frozen in place with their terrified expressions preserved in ice. As expected, the 5 swordsmen dodged the attack effortlessly, retreating before it struck. One of them stepped forward, the leader, by his demeanor. He unsheathed his blade, a crooked smile playing on his face, though his eyes were calculating. I glared at them, unflinching, while the guards began their counterattack against the invading forces. The sounds of clashing steel and roaring voices filled the clearing. Fendrel and Darian approached me. "What do we know about them?" I asked without taking my eyes off the 5 figures. "They're known as the Black Frost 5, Fendrel said grimly. "Infamous mercenaries in the underworld. They've never failed a job, but they're only advanced-level swordsmen." I swallowed hard. Black Frost. The name felt like a cruel irony, given my reliance on ice magic. The apparent leader stepped forward. He had long brown hair and a jagged scar running diagonally across his face, making him appear almost grotesque. His voice was clear and sharp as he addressed Fendrel. "Fendrel, it's been a while." Fendrel narrowed his eyes but remained calm. "Resorting to working with slavers now? I'm not impressed." The swordsman chuckled. "We do what's necessary. And you, come to die alongside these furballs." I was prepared for their provocations. It was a common tactic in the North God style. But my instincts screamed louder than ever. Something was wrong, horribly wrong. I scanned the battlefield, using every sense at my disposal. The fights around me were chaotic but didn't justify the danger I felt. It wasn't these 5, their strength alone wouldn't provoke such a reaction. Deciding not to take chances, I signaled the hidden warriors to attack prematurely. Just as I felt a fleeting sense of safety, it happened. The enemy leader charged at Fendrel, wielding what I recognized as a longsword of silence. The choice seemed absurd, given his opponent. Fendrel appeared wary, his eyes darting to the other 4 swordsmen. He activated his ultimate technique, the longsword of light. "Seeking a swift death, I'll oblige," he said coldly. But before I could react, Darian moved. He was behind Fendrel in an instant, his blade slicing through the air toward his childhood friend's back. "Fendrel, behind you," I shouted, acting on instinct. My warning came just in time. Fendrel deflected the strike and twisted his body, narrowly avoiding being cleaved in half. However, Darian's blade continued, severing Fendrel's dominant arm and slicing off his right ear. Blood sprayed across the snow as Fendrel stumbled back, clutching the bleeding stump where his arm had been. "Darian," Fendrel gasped, disbelief etched across his face. Darian showed no remorse. His expression was cold, his eyes devoid of emotion. "I'm sorry, old friend. But the world is cruel." Rage erupted within me, wild and unrelenting. Before I knew it, I was hurtling toward Darian, moving faster than I ever had. "You'll pay for this," I roared, my voice raw with fury. The mercenary leader smirked as he watched the chaos unfold. "Looks like the real show has begun. The great battle will cover a good part of the next chapter. Comment what you think now." DaoistJunkYard creators' thoughts. 20 comments, 0 vote. 10 prayer predator. The metallic scent of blood mingled with the humid air of the forest. Darian faced Rygar, raising his sword. His eyes, once brimming with the confidence of an experienced warrior, now faltered under the predatory stance of the young Doldia. Rygar moved forward, low and fluid like a predator stalking its prey. He feinted a strike with his sword to Darian's left, aiming for the mercenary's abdomen, but at the last moment, he twisted his torso and slashed toward Darian's neck. Darian's blade rose to block, its steel glinting under the sunlight filtering through the trees. The clash rang out in the clearing, but the strike was a decoy. In the same motion, Rygar planted his foot and spun, releasing his sword in midair in a North God-style technique, and delivered a devastating kick to Darian's stomach. The mercenary leader was hurled backward like a stone, flying several meters before crashing against a tree. The wood groaned, and Darian collapsed to his knees, coughing and clutching his abdomen. Rygar caught his sword as it fell, his gaze fixed on his target. Before he could strike again, a commanding voice broke through the tension. "Rygar, don't advance alone." Fendrel, wounded, clutched his severed arm while shouting with effort. His voice stirred something within Rygar, briefly pulling him back to rationality. Rygar blinked, the world around him realigning. Quickly, he reached Fendrel's side and cast healing magic to stop the bleeding. He lamented his lack of advanced healing magic, which could have reattached the arm if the wound were fresh. He tried pushing the limits of intermediate healing magic, but to no avail. While Rygar paused to regain focus, Darian staggered to his feet, still clutching his pained stomach. "You're as impressive as ever, Rygar," Darian spat, a mocking smile on his lips. "Why, Darian, is there a good reason for this? Are they threatening the rest of our group?" Fendrel asked, hope evident in his voice. "The rest of the group is safe, secured somewhere," Darian replied. "I don't have time for a melodramatic explanation, we're short on time, after all." Before Fendrel could respond, the remaining 5 Black Frost mercenaries began to encircle him and Rygar. "But if you need a summary," Darian continued, "it's about always living in your shadow, being weaker, slower, less talented. When we formed our adventurer group, you were the undeniable leader. When the woman of my dreams joined, she chose you. Call me crazy, or whatever you want, but this job pays more than we've earned in all our adventures combined, enough for me to live in peace with Arena and the others in the north. Without you. But don't worry, our friendship was real. I'll make sure they know you died a hero." His tone was cold, but the emotion in his eyes betrayed him. Fendrel crumbled, his last hope crushed mercilessly. "How touching," one mercenary sneered, sharpening his blade against his hand. "Let's wrap this up, kid." The sound of snapping branches and rustling leaves filled the air. One by one, the Dodoldia warriors emerged from the shadows. Guys led the charge, sword in hand and a deathly glint in his eyes. "Rats like you should never have entered this forest," Guys said, his voice low and menacing. Huntar appeared beside him, his fists clenched and his claws already stained with the blood of earlier battles. More Dodoldia warriors emerged, surrounding the mercenaries with deadly precision. "Why didn't they attack our bases? Isn't that what Zen told us?" One mercenary muttered, his gaze darting nervously. "Something went wrong," another replied, but before they could act, Guys raised his sword and shouted. "Advance!" The battlefield erupted into chaos. Guys charged first, targeting 2 mercenaries with surprising speed. He swung his sword in a horizontal arc, forcing them to retreat. Before they could recover, he roared, releasing a howling magic that stunned them. Seizing the opening, he struck diagonally, his blade slicing through one mercenary from shoulder to chest. Across the clearing, Huntar fought with raw power and precision. He punched a mercenary in the face, breaking his nose with a single blow. When another tried to attack from behind, Huntar spun, grabbing the man's arm and snapping it before slamming him into the ground with his claws. In the center of the battle, Rygar regained his confidence. Leaving the unconscious Fendrel in a safe spot, he rejoined the fray. He moved like a blur, using earth magic to create small protrusions under his enemy's feet, throwing them off balance before striking. One mercenary tripped and fell, and Rygar pounced, driving his sword into the man's throat in a diagonal slash that spilled blood onto the forest floor. Another enemy, wielding 2 daggers dripping with poison, approached. Rygar backed off, watching the man's swift movements. Using wind magic to boost his speed, he dodged an attack, spinning to the enemy's back. With a sharp movement, he whispered a spell, Wind Blade. The magical slash tore through the mercenary's body, leaving him screaming on the ground. Despite the Dodoldia warriors' advantage, the Black Frost mercenaries were no ordinary foes. 2 of them, masters of the North God style, fought side by side. Their blades moved in swift, precise arcs, cutting down Dodoldia warriors as they advanced. One of them targeted Guys, who blocked the strikes but was slowly pushed back by their relentless assault. "Rygar, with me," Guys called out as he fended off a series of rapid attacks. Rygar noticed the mercenary pressing Guys, his blade moving with practiced precision. Guys was forced to retreat step by step, and the mercenary, confident, surged forward for a decisive overhead strike. Without hesitation, Rygar charged to assist. He conjured earthen spikes beneath the enemy's feet, forcing him to leap to avoid the attack. The brief pause gave Guys enough time to recover his stance and strike, but the mercenary easily blocked it, spinning to deliver a quick blow to Rygar's side as he closed the distance. The impact was weaker than expected, as Rygar caught the strike with sheer force. He countered with a kick to the enemy's knee, causing him to stagger and creating an opening for Guys to unleash his howling magic. The spell hit directly, disorienting the mercenary, who clutched his ears as the deafening sound reverberated. Also stunned, but already accustomed to the magic's effects, Rygar seized the moment of vulnerability and dealt the final blow. He leapt forward, his blade slicing cleanly through the mercenary's neck. The opponent collapsed to the ground, his sword clattering against the stones. As the remaining mercenaries struggled to hold their ground, one of them, scanning the battlefield, realized what was happening. They knew everything. We were deceived, he shouted, eyes wide as he looked at Darian. But Darian was as bewildered as the rest. Even so, he raised his sword and snarled. It doesn't matter. Keep fighting. Fendril is injured, we can still turn this around. Despite his words, the tide of battle had shifted in the Doldia's favor. Every move reminded the intruders that the forest was their home, while the mercenaries were unwelcome invaders. One by one, the enemies fell to claws, swords, and magic. Soon, another of the Black Frost Five was slain, Lonar, the guard captain, driving his blade into the man's chest. Darian and the remaining 3 mercenaries began retreating, their bodies covered in cuts and bloodstains. However, as they fled, one of them left an opening, which Lonar confidently exploited. But it was a feint. As his blade was about to strike, a hidden dagger flew, embedding itself in Lonar's eye. Rygar watched in horror as his ally fell, the knife lodged in his skull, his eyes glazing over in pain. Something primal stirred within Rygar. The growl that escaped his throat was deep and feral. His eyes locked onto the fleeing enemies, and his fists clenched until his nails drew blood. He no longer thought. Rage clouded his mind. He could only feel. Do not pursue. We've already taken down most of them, this is our victory. Guys declared. The hurried footsteps of the fleeing mercenaries echoed through the clearing, snapping branches and crushing dry leaves. Lonar's body lay motionless on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Rygar dropped his sword and knelt beside his fallen friend, already knowing it was too late. Lonar, he whispered, his voice heavy with pain and anger. A Doldia warrior placed a hand on his shoulder. Rygar, we. But he didn't hear. A deep roar tore from his throat as he sprang to his feet, his gaze fixed on the retreating mercenaries. His beast instincts took over, and his mind was consumed by a single thought: hunt. He sprinted into the forest, his senses heightened by his fury. Every heartbeat of the enemies ahead drummed in his ears, calling him to battle. His magical eyes pulsed, capturing every movement, every labored breath from his prey. Rygar extended his hand, summoning earth magic. The ground beneath one mercenary surged upward, forming a pillar that slammed him into a tree. The impact was brutal, and before the man could recover, Rygar was upon him. Without hesitation, Rygar drove his claws into the man's chest, tearing through light armor. With a feral motion, he ripped upward, rending flesh and metal. The mercenary crumpled, gasping, until a final slash across his throat ended him. Farther ahead, another mercenary turned to face him. This one wielded a longsword with refined technique, likely trained in the North God style. He advanced, delivering swift, precise thrusts, but Rygar dodged each strike with instinctive movements. The mercenary attempted a horizontal slash, but Rygar deftly closed the distance, twisting his arm and slamming him into the ground. Rygar grabbed his neck. You're not escaping. With sheer brute strength, he snapped the man's neck like a twig. By then, the Doldia warriors had caught up to him. Guys roared, unleashing his howling magic, sending shockwaves through the forest. The remaining mercenaries staggered, disoriented by the impact. But Rygar felt the shockwave too, though to a lesser degree. His body tensed, and his mind, already frayed by the frenzy, betrayed him. He turned toward Guys, his glowing eyes filled with unbridled rage. All he registered was the pain caused by the magic, and Guys became a target. Before anyone could react, Rygar lunged at his ally. He struck with his claws. Guys dodged instinctively but still suffered a deep slash to his neck, narrowly avoiding a fatal wound. Another warrior tried to intervene, but Rygar spun, elbowing him into a tree with bone-cracking force. Rygar, control yourself, shouted Huntar, his father, stepping between his son and the other warriors. Rygar growled low, advancing with claws raised. Huntar didn't back down. When the strike came, he sidestepped, but not enough to avoid it entirely. Rygar's claws tore into his left arm, blood dripping down the older warrior's forearm. The sight of his father's blood momentarily froze Rygar. His breaths came in ragged gasps, and his eyes flickered between fury and shock. You're not an animal. Control yourself, Rygar, Huntar said firmly, his voice steady despite the pain. Sanity flickered back into Rygar's mind, albeit briefly. He stepped back, staring at his blood-stained claws and the wound on Huntar's arm. The sound of the fleeing mercenaries, however, pulled his attention again. He was not in control, his rationality teetered on the edge. He was afraid he might kill someone if he stayed. I'm in control now, he told himself, but hadn't he said the same before? Don't follow me. Before anyone could stop him, Rygar darted into the forest, chasing after the enemies alone. Dash dash dash. The remaining mercenaries had regrouped, with Darian leading them. They chose a clearing surrounded by dense trees, a favorable spot for an ambush. He's coming, Darian said, gripping his sword tightly. Are you sure this is a good idea? 2 of us are already dead. One of the Black Frost 5 whispered. He's seen your faces. He's 6 years old now and already a monster. What happens in 10 years? Do you want to live the rest of your life waiting for him to come for your head? Darian retorted. How do you know he'll come alone? Another asked. The kid's been half crazed lately, but it's just a chance. If he brings others, we'll continue retreating. Rygar emerged, running into view, his breathing heavy and his gaze fixed on the group. The 3 mercenaries took their positions, while others hidden in the trees waited for the right moment to strike. Finally alone, are you? Darian taunted. Did you finish off your friends back there? Rygar's instinct screamed that something was wrong. He tried to stop, but it was too late. Arrows rained down from above. He used wind magic to deflect most, but one grazed his shoulder, and another embedded itself in his leg. He roared, snapping the arrow shaft before charging forward again. Darian advanced with 2 allies. One of them, a swordsman skilled in both the North God and Water God styles, unleashed swift, fluid strikes. Rygar dodged as best he could but was struck on the flank by a shallow cut. Reacting quickly, he used earth magic to conjure a column of stone, forcing his opponent to back off. However, another mercenary attacked from the side, leaving Rygar surrounded on all fronts. His eyes sharpened like a predator's, his ears catching even the faintest sounds. The battle dragged on. Rygar possessed extraordinary vitality, but even he was beginning to feel exhaustion setting in. Sensing danger behind him, he spun around just in time, his heightened senses alerting him to an incoming strike. He cast his howling magic to gain a brief respite, but the mercenaries were prepared. Covering their ears, they pressed forward, and a diagonal sword slash tore across his back, leaving a searing pain that clouded his mind. Driven by pure survival instinct, Rygar retaliated with a sonic blast to his right, using the recoil to launch himself in the opposite direction. He collided with one of the mercenaries, the impact leaving him disoriented. He knew he was at a severe disadvantage, his body moving on sheer willpower as he desperately sought an opening. Rolling to the side, he contemplated using large-scale magic, but his dwindling mana made the idea impossible. He felt his reserves nearing depletion, forcing him to conserve what little he had left. Rygar stumbled, his body battered and covered in cuts and bruises. The taste of iron filled his mouth, and blood trickled down the side of his face. Breathing heavily, he remained defiant, his eyes blazing with both fury and determination. The 3 remaining mercenaries surrounded him with calculated precision. Darian stood at the front, his sword poised, while the other 2 flanked Rygar with deliberate steps. Still standing. Impressive, Darian sneered. Now that I think about it, wasn't your elven master's name Verdia? Verdia Solarian. If you survive, you might find an unpleasant surprise waiting for you. His cold smile cut deeper than any blade. Taking it as a provocation, Rygar flexed his knees, shifting into a defensive stance. He used water magic to clear the blood obscuring his left eye and activated his magic eye to track their subtle movements. One of the mercenaries made the first move, lunging with the longsword of silence, a sword god technique. Rygar countered with earth magic, creating a slight elevation beneath the enemy's feet, causing him to stumble. Seizing the opportunity, Rygar lunged and slashed diagonally with his claws, carving deep into the man's shoulder. The second mercenary wasted no time, launching a concealed North God attack from behind. The strike was devastating, but Rygar managed to raise a stone wall just in time. The force shattered the barrier, throwing him backward. Rygar collided with the trunk of a tree, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Before he could recover, Darian advanced, his blade gleaming with lethal intent. Rygar felt the cold grip of death as he sensed no escape. In desperation, he unleashed Fire Explosion, an advanced fire spell, at point-blank range. The flames engulfed Darian, but the sheer force also sent Rygar hurtling backward. The forest clearing was illuminated by the explosion, and the shockwave scattered the other mercenaries. Rygar landed hard, rolling across the ground, his body now covered in severe burns. Smoke curled from his charred skin as he rose, his monstrous physique the only thing keeping him standing. Darian emerged from the flames, limping and bleeding from multiple wounds. His leather armor was scorched, and half his body and face were burned beyond recognition, but he refused to fall. "You're a monster, kid," he rasped. Grinding his teeth, Rygar invoked mud magic, turning the ground beneath his enemies into a quagmire. The unstable footing caused two of them to lose their balance. Using wind magic to propel himself forward, Rygar targeted the swordsman, blending the sword god and water god styles. With a precise strike, he tore the man's throat open before he could recover from the mud. The body fell with a dull thud. Rygar turned to the next enemy, who had already escaped the quagmire. This mercenary employed advanced North God techniques, delivering a series of rapid, heavy strikes. Rygar dodged as best he could, but one slash caught his shoulder, cutting deep. Ignoring the pain, Rygar executed a risky grappling maneuver, slipping inside the mercenary's guard. He locked the man's neck in a leg hold while grabbing his sword hand with raw strength. With one sharp motion, Rygar finished him with a lethal claw to the throat. Now only Darian remained. Both combatants were bloody, exhausted, and on the brink of collapse. Darian, unable to escape, leaned on his sword for support. He smirked. "My team's at the training grounds, 500 meters that way," he said, pointing in a specific direction. Rygar stood silent, his breaths ragged as rage consumed his thoughts. "I thought I'd fail to kill Fendrel, and he'd end me, but I never imagined dying at your hands," Darian muttered, gazing at the overcast sky. Rygar advanced, picking up a fallen sword from the ground. "I wasn't lying about your master," Darian continued, his voice faltering. "The leader of our group, the North Saint Kalinowski, was sent with a secondary mission to capture elven slaves. But his primary mission is to assassinate Verdia Solarian. Seems your master upset the wrong people." "Is that true?" Rygar growled. Darian coughed violently, blood staining his lips. "Yes. They're probably arriving as we speak. If you leave now, you might already be too late. But hey, tell Fendrel I'm sorry, will you?" Rygar said nothing, staring at Darian as he knelt in defeat. Lifting the sword, he brought it down, severing the man's head in one clean motion. Dash dash dash. With his mana almost depleted, Rygar used what little he had left to heal his most severe wounds. He headed to the location Darian had mentioned, freeing his captured allies. Healing Marla, the healer, he gave her instructions. "Tell my parents, I'm heading to the Elven village. A North Saint is targeting Verdia. Protect our home. I'll return." Without waiting for a response, he turned and disappeared into the forest. He paused briefly, blood dripping from his hands, his mind still burning with the heat of battle. Darian's words echoed like a relentless drumbeat in his head. Looking back in the direction of his tribe, he hesitated. The fear of harming those he loved gnawed at him. He left his message and moved forward without hesitation, running through the dense woods. His silhouette faded into the night as his mind focused on one goal: saving Verdia.